Well, usually there. And if you don't remember, just to remind, it's Ask Neil Pinder on YouTube. I think I used to have the domain name, but I forgot. I don't think I point that to something else now. But if you just do a YouTube search for Ask Neil Pinder, you can find where I'm live streaming these, and be sure you choose live instead of videos. That's where they'll all show up. Okay. So let's take a look at the syllabus a little more closely, because that, I hope I've impressed upon you the importance of it, is your lifeline. That's the roadmap. And this is a brand new syllabus this year. They've just rearranged things. It's not all new material. They just reconfigured. So okay, we'll do this first. Live stream is good. I'm seeing people. Make sure I got everybody on video. Gotta have you on video during the 50 minutes of instruction, and I will give you those 10-minute breaks for every 50 minutes. So if I don't get you on video, I'll have to put you in the waiting room. Got my little reminders here. Okay. So here is our syllabus, and hopefully you've read through at least this first introductory part. And I'm not going to do that with you. I'll just hit some highlights here. Talks about the topics, talks about how it comes from the Real Estate Commission, and that it is a minimum of 75 hours of the course. We do more than that because honestly, they should make it more, but they require that minimum, and we require longer. It includes, your materials include the textbook that you've already hopefully gotten familiar with and read at least chapter 1 and 2, or most of it, as well as these things: the Real Estate License Law and Commission Rules. Those are PDFs that I gave you via the Notion software. Hopefully all of that. And by the way, let me know in the chat if you have not been successful in getting Notion to cooperate with you. Hopefully you're able to access that. If you have not yet left me a message there on the little message board, please do so I can see that you are able to access that properly. Because I will give you more information over the course. If you ask me for a further explanation of agency, for instance, I could do a video or an audio only or a typed out text explainer. And I've done that a lot of times, and they've sort of accumulated in the Notion. You'll find some things that I just left in there because a lot of times one question from one person means everybody's got that same question. So take a look at Notion. That also includes what I'll give you later. Well, I already gave it to you, but it's in the Google Drive. It's this square footage guidelines PDF. It's yellow. The book is actually yellow when you get the printed version. We're not there yet. I'll point it out to you when it's time to cover that. The safety guide, we'll cover that info toward the end of the course. The offer to purchase and contract, that's the one that we tend to use the most. So here's a testable question. Hopefully during all of these class sessions, you are you're keeping a notebook to the side and making notes when I say, hey, this is highly testable. Quite likely you're going to see it. And here it is. Can a real estate agent in North Carolina use just any sales contract to help their client purchase real estate? Is that allowed to use any sales contract? The answer is no, not just any of them. It's got to have 19 provisions that the Real Estate Commission has determined it must contain. If it's a form contract with fill in the blanks, then we can use it as long as the maker of that contract has put in these 19 provisions. Here's the good news. You don't need to know the 19 provisions. I'll show them to you. And a lot of them you'll be like, well, of course, that makes sense. Why wouldn't they want that to be in there? But here's the lesson. We can use any contract as long as it's a fill in the blank only. We cannot write it from scratch. Because why? We're not attorneys. We can't draft legal language. I've mentioned that to you before. Having trouble seeing two of you still, so let's make sure. And by the way, guys, if the video is not cooperating on one device, feel free to use your phone to dial in. There we go. I can see you better now. And then I'm still missing one. I'm going to have to send you to the waiting room. There we go. Nope, still missing one. Okay, thank you. Um, so we can use any form in North Carolina as long as we didn't write it and as long as all we're doing is filling in the blanks. And when it comes to the actual contract, offer to purchase and contract, this is a double duty form here. It's the offer, which may never turn into a contract, right? I ask my CE students all the time, hey, in the last 4 or 5 years with these multiple contracts going on, how many offers did you have to make for your buyer before one finally got accepted that your client beat out all the other competing offers? And many times they said 10, 20, 30. One of them said 83 offers they had to make before they finally got an accepted offer. That's a lot of paperwork. And so all those 82 of those offers were just offers. Only one of them became an eventual contract. See what I'm saying? So this is the standard form 2T. Who created this thing? Not some individual agent, but the trade group that we belong to called the North Carolina Association of Realtors. That's the trade group that gives us, as its members, all the forms that we need. But again, do we have to only use a realtor provided form? No. We can use all kinds of different sources of forms. What's another source that we could use if it needed to be some sort of highly customized, fancy offer to purchasing contract that involved owner financing and all kinds of special extras that the buyer client of yours wanted to have built into it? What would be a way that we could get that done? Because this one wouldn't satisfy all that. You'd have to attach a bunch of addenda to it and blah, blah, blah. They want to have a custom one made. What is our advice? Gotcha. Okay, I see you. I see you there, William. I saw your chat. What's our solution if we need something created that is not a standard form that's available from the NCAR, North Carolina Association of Realtors? Give me that in the chat, please. Any guesses? Where would you go if you needed a contract written? I kind of already, yeah, that's your go-to. So if it's not something we have available in the inventory of many, many, many forms and addenda and amendments that we have been given as part of, not really given, we're paying our dues to be realtors and therefore we have access to this thing. If we don't have access to something and it doesn't satisfy the client's needs, that's our next move. Hey, client, let's get an attorney to write that for us, for you. Here is the login. When you become a realtor, this is the login for one of the 3 parts of being a realtor. There's 3 sections. There's the National Association of Realtors, which is in the news right now. There's the North Carolina one, and then there's your local board of whatever local town and city you're in. This one is the NCAR. And so we would log in. I've already done that. We go down here to Forms Library. And I'm just showing you how many forms we have to work with. This is what's available to us. And they've got it broken down in lots of different ways. But even just on the auction side of things, there's 16 forms. I've never used one of them because I've never done an auction. But buyer-related forms, I've done a lot of that. 14 related buyer forms, including the buyer representation agreement. There's an exclusive version and there's a non-exclusive version. If we wanted to let a buyer work with more than just us, we would use the non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. By the way, what would be a good reason to let a buyer or agree to have a buyer also represented by a different agent besides you? In other words, you might not get paid. There's a couple of cases in the business where you might have to use that version if they refuse to sign an exclusive version. And you're going to have to make a business decision along with your BIC and firm policies and procedures if you'll even go along with that arrangement. Do you want to put in 10, 20 hours when you might not even be the agent they actually end up using? Maybe not. And that's okay if the answer is no. But here's a situation where this non-exclusive buyer agency agreement might actually be the best choice. You can see right here. We've got the exclusive one. We're going to look at that together later. Not today, but another week. Then we have down here the non-exclusive one. What if your buyer was relocating here from Alaska and they weren't sure what part of North Carolina they wanted to settle down in? Maybe Charlotte, maybe Raleigh or Wilmington, right? So you could either find out, oh, shoot, you're the first point of contact, first one they talk to. You could either say, well, I sure hope they pick Charlotte if you're the Charlotte one, because otherwise, if they end up in Raleigh, it's not going to do me any good. I don't even have MLS access up there. I won't be the agent that shows them that house because my lockbox won't work because you have to subscribe regionally to the lockbox system and the MLS system of a certain market, and they're not crossover markets. You'd have to subscribe to both if you wanted to work in both Charlotte and Raleigh and have access to their MLSs. So rather than working for maybe a 50-50 chance of getting something, and you're the first point of contact, how about say to your client prospect, hey, client, I've got a great agent in Raleigh that I can connect you with. I understand that you want to consider both areas. If you decide in Charlotte, then I'll be your person. If you decide on Raleigh, then that'll be your person. And then, by the way, if you pick the Raleigh area, I'll get a referral fee from the Raleigh agent. And if you pick the Charlotte area, I'll pay the Raleigh agent a referral fee. Is that a better solution than maybe not even making anything? That's when a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement might work, because you're not the only one. It might be that Raleigh person if you're the Charlotte one. Does that make sense? So knowing how to use these forms is the next thing you're going to learn once you get in the business. So what we're going to cover in this course are just the major ones, just the listing one and the sales one, the contract offer to purchasing contract, standard form 2T. And that's in here somewhere. Let's see. Because it's a buyer related form. I'll let somebody in. There we go. Oh, it's in contracts. Okay, of course. So the buyer-related forms over here are the ones that have to do with hiring the buyer agent. Then there's the contract forms, which is where we'll find the offer to purchase one. And there's a lot of addenda and amendments. We'll get to that when we hit the contracts chapter. But when we want to modify this basic offer to purchase contract, there's already built-in forms to do that with, and we'll get more into that later. But just look, we've got buyer initiated 7, contract 7. Let's see, where were we? Okay, let's reset. There we go. So anyway, buyers, 14 of them. Commercial side, there's 96 of them. But in fact, in commercial, some of you may already be aware of this, they don't tend to use fill in the blank forms all that much. In commercial, they're much more likely to use custom written contracts from attorneys on staff or attorney relationships they have. 157 total contract forms, including all the addenda and amendments. New construction, there's 12 and 31 and 8 and 52 property management ones and seller ones, 26. So a lot, right? And if there's something that's not in here that you need, go to the attorney. That's sort of the way that goes. Let's flip back over to the syllabus. So we will be looking at this offer to purchase. We've talked about the relink. You took the quiz. Hopefully you've all taken that relink quiz. Again, that does not point toward passing the course, but it's something that is better to do in the course when we ask you to, because it just kind of spaces it out better. And you don't want to save them all to the end. For one thing, it's going to help you a lot more if you take these quizzes and assignments along the way. But you should have already done that relink. I saw some scores popping in and saw some good scores. Sections from update courses. So this syllabus references other continuing education update courses that go into depth on some of these issues. And then some disclosure forms and publications. We're going to talk about the main 2 disclosure forms at a later date that a seller has to fill out when you're listing a property. One of them is called the RPOADS, RPOADS, Residential Property Owners and Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure. It's about 4 pages. They're about to bump it up to 8 because right now it's really small print, so they're going to make it easier to read, thank goodness. Add 4 more items that's not been approved yet. But that is something the seller has to fill out. We can't do it for them. We'll talk about it. I'll show it. I'll give it to you so you can interact with it and see what it's all about. And then there's something called the Mineral, Oil, and Gas Rights Disclosure. So the MOG and the RPOADS, you can write this off to the side, are disclosures that need to be completed when listing a property. All sellers have to fill those out. The MOG means, has the seller sold the rights to some other third party for the privilege of mining for mineral, oil, or gas underneath the surface, subsurface rights, which we are going to get into a little bit today, subsurface rights. Let's see what else. The other thing I wanted to point out, we talked about the levels already, so I won't belabor that. And then here's the best part. The most important part is the contents, and it shows roughly how many hours of class time we're going to spend on these various topics. Again, this will help you see what you need to spend the most time on in review when we get to the review time. Obviously, agency and contracts, by far the biggest chunk. Then we've got finance and valuation. And then it goes into more detail about what pages in the syllabus those things actually are. So with that said, let's look at what hopefully you've already read on your own. And I want to show you what I would suggest you do when you're interacting with this syllabus. First of all, hopefully you read the legend. There's notes in here, important information about testing. The terms are italicized. They're going to have some required activities that I've incorporated in, you'll see and can expect. And then some math calculations. There's not one section of the syllabus that has all the math spelled out. They've kind of sprinkled it throughout the various topics. And that's because it needs to be fit in with taxation and fit in with finance math. So it will come when the syllabus topic requires it. And then law and rule references. That's a big one I wanted to point out because that one in particular is blue highlighted as a link. So let me show you something. If we're coming down here and we're looking at this part, activities requiring a license. Let me flip over. And here's what I'd like you to do in real life. Have your syllabus on the desk beside you, hopefully printed out. Have your material, whatever it is, on the desk beside you. And then here's what you can do when you're looking at your syllabus. Activities requiring a license. Click on the link, and right there on your machine, on your computer, it pops up a new window with that actual general statute. So you can see over here on the left, it's general statute. That's what NCGS means, North Carolina General Statute. Sorry, as I'm navigating here. NCGS 93A-2A. Here's the good news. You don't ever have to memorize them. You don't need to memorize the addresses of these statutes, laws, and rules. You just need to know the contents of them. What do they mean? Not all of them either, but the ones in the syllabus. And in this case, the activities requiring a license could be boiled down to this handy little acronym, LL-BEANS. You need to have a license if you're going to help someone else list, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, or sell property. And see what I did? LL-BEANS is not in your syllabus. I've added it to mine. So I marked it. So out to the side, if you have it printed out, write it. Write these helpful acronyms. And then down the line, it's not in that same order, but they're all right there, A, B, C, A through F right there. And then there on the right, you can see where it spells that out. And notice the language. The one part on the right is the license law section, written by an attorney, getting paid by the word, apparently, because sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, can you just write it in everyday conversational English? No, they can't. They have to write it fancy. That's why I like to start with the comment section, because it's a little easier for our brains to grasp, especially when we're tired. But then hit the link, go see it in real life like this, where it came from. The Real Estate Commission specifically told us, don't let your students only study the comments section. It's okay to start with it and use it as a guideline, but they want you to read from the source of where these license laws come from. That's anything starting with a 93A. That's how you know it's a licensed law. And then let me make that a little bigger. And then a commission rule is anything starting with either a 58A or a 0 dot something, 0.0 something. That's how you know it's a rule. But again, you don't have to memorize those numbers for which the rule is. But if we look down through here, it says things like what? Activities requiring a license. Okay, yeah. Where'd it go? Oh, this is the exceptions. I think I clicked the wrong one. This one says, oh, no, it's this first one. So the thing requiring a license is this part. Here's where the LL Beans comes from. Lists or offers to list, sells or offers to sell, buys or offers to buy, auctions, negotiates or exchanges. And there's the lease as well. So there's where that LL Beans acronym comes from. If we go further down, we'll see the next topic, which is what types of people are exempt from needing a real estate license. Who can do real estate without a license when you normally would need one? And that is, for one thing, anybody that you've given permission to act on your behalf. So any person acting as an attorney in fact, any actual attorney, which is an attorney at law versus in fact, right? Anybody that is set aside by law as like a trustee or receiver or guardian for somebody. Guardian for who? An underage person. I had a listing one time, and the surviving heirs of the deceased owner were 3 adult daughters and 1 12-year-old boy. And so his mom stepped in as his guardian. So I interacted with her and the 3 adult daughters, right? Executors of an estate when it's a deceased situation. I also, in that same transaction, dealt with his brother because he had named his brother as the executor of the estate. And then anybody acting as a trustee, when you set up a trust, then you appoint someone who is going to handle that trust, make the decisions, and carry out the wishes of the person who set up the trust. That person's called the trustee. So we can kind of see where all of these things are based. If you ever see something, if it's like the printed version of the syllabus, and you see that they're referencing 93A2, anything that starts with a general statute, you can actually cut and paste that in and just do an internet search. And because it's NCGS, North Carolina General Statute, it'll also pop up that way. So you've got different ways of finding this stuff. So hopefully you've read down through here. We talked about a lot of this the last week. We talked about what people without licenses are allowed to do. They can't do LL Beans, list, lease, buy, exchange, negotiate, or sell, or auction. But they can do things like be a courier, put up the yard sign in the lockbox. They can answer basic questions about the property. What can they not do? What can an unlicensed assistant of yours not do for you on Saturday when you want to show off your new listing to the public and, I don't know, maybe hold an what? What am I talking about? You ever drive around on the weekends and just go in and look at people? Yeah. So an unlicensed assistant cannot be the only person at that open house. Somebody with a license better be there too. They can be there too, but they can't only be there because that's like showing the house, and unlicensed people also cannot show houses for sale. Here's the exemptions that I was just looking at in the actual license law, because right here is the syllabus. And an entity selling or leasing their own real estate. An entity means a legal, on paper owner. So not a human. So a lot of times when you're buying rental property, some of you might have experienced this. Do you own rental property? Do you think, for instance, let's just say Michael Jordan in Charlotte has some rental property, maybe big fancy commercial office buildings. Do you think that if you looked it up in the tax record, you're going to find those owned by Michael Jordan? Or are you going to find them owned by some secret word LLC that only he knows it's him. Because does he really want people to know he owns stuff? I wouldn't. And that's how people do that, right? They own things in the name of an entity. Setting up that limited liability company, LLC or LLP, limited liability partnership, or C corporation or S, subchapter S. Those are business entities that might show up as the owner of the property instead of the human name. And so if that entity is the one who owns 123 ABC Street, then you're the officer of that corporation, you don't need a real estate license because you're representing the entity that owns the property. You're a representative of the entity. Basically, it's like it's your property because you're the officer of the corporation or the manager of the LLC, whatever your role might be. And that's what this means. We just talked about an attorney in fact. Let me highlight this. I try to highlight the things that I add. So anybody who is given power of attorney to sign on someone else's behalf is an attorney in fact for that person. An attorney at law, harder to get that. You got to go through law school and pass the bar. So here's the thing about attorneys at law doing real estate. What do attorneys at law do for people? All kinds of stuff. They go to court for you. They fight your traffic tickets. They handle your divorces. They handle your estates and your probate and all kinds of stuff. If an attorney is handling somebody's business and part of that law business involves some real estate that's owned by the customer, then it is allowable. They are exempt from needing a real estate license because what they're really doing is carrying out their legal business. It just so happens that it involves your real estate holdings. That does not mean that attorney can go out there and do real estate without a license, like go out and list things. I need everybody's attention. If it's looking like you're on the phone call or talking, I need you to shut that down, please, or I'll have to put you in the waiting room. Because it's distracting. So an attorney carrying out their legal business does not need a real estate license to do real estate as long as it's just tied to their legal stuff. But again, it doesn't mean they can just go down the street to their neighbor and say, hey, Bob, let me list your house. I'm an attorney. No, sorry. It doesn't go that far, right? That's a testable item. It's a potentially testable thing. You'd have to understand the limits an attorney has of being able to do real estate, and their only exemption is through their legal practice. Someone acting under a court order, we already saw that. A trustee, a person in charge of a trust, and then particularly in property management, salaried employees of broker property managers. What is this? It's you, once you have a broker's license and you become non-provisional and you decide to become a property manager for other people. And you decide to hire an unlicensed person and pay them a salary, not a commission. Since they're paid salary by you and you have the license, then they can do some real estate that normally would require a license. What can unlicensed people involved in property management do that usually would require a license? They can, first of all, they like to test you on this, they can show rental properties for lease. So you notice the difference? If we don't have a license, we cannot show for sale property, but we can show for rent property. If I had to think of a way to remember that, I would probably justify it by saying probably less likely when you're showing a potential tenant the rental property for them to try to challenge you or negotiate the rent than it is on the price for showing a sale. In other words, if you're showing something for sale and you say, hey, it's $550,000, quite likely they might say, would they take $540,000? But if you're showing something for rent and you say, hey, it's $3,000 a month, they're probably a little less likely to challenge that, negotiate that. If they ever would, and it's just between them and an unlicensed person who's showing it that rental, then they would just need to say, hey, it's out of my depth. You need to talk to my broker boss. I don't have a real estate license. I can just show you the property, but they can't show for sale properties. And then an individual selling or leasing their own property. You might see the acronym FSBO or FURBO. That means for sale by owner or for rent by owner, right? Handling your own real estate does not require a real estate license. Some people in these classes, they say, well, what I want to do is buy and sell my own real estate. And I do usually mention, well, you don't need a license for that. Oh, I know. Why would they still want a license? if what they want to do is just buy and sell their own real estate? What are some good reasons to go ahead and have your license, even though all you're planning to do is buy and sell your own stuff?
You wouldn't have to pay a broker.
Yeah, that's a good one. Saving on commissions, having access to the MLS, knowing what the real estate commission puts out there for agents to know, and how the business works. And there is a downside though. And that downside is on the disclosure end of things, because when we get into that section, that RPODS property disclosure I mentioned, if you do have a real estate license and you're selling your own property, you cannot exercise one of the 3 options or check boxes on that disclosure that says, hey, I'm not telling you whether the roof leaks or not. If you don't have a license, you are free to check no representation. That's what no representation box means. On this particular item, I'm not telling you whether there is a problem or isn't. But if you have a license, now you can't use that same loophole. So there's upsides and downsides. I'd say the positives outweigh the negatives. That's like one of the only negatives. But you are held to a higher standard, because sort of like if you're a black belt in martial arts, you're going to be extra careful not to get in an altercation on the street, because you'd probably be more legally liable for what would transpire. You're more capable of harming the other person, right? Housing authority, government housing authority can do real estate without a license because that's their business and it's for helping people. So there's the final exemption there. We talked about the composition of the real estate commission. Tell me in the chat or speak out, how many commissioners are on the board? The real estate commission. Commissioners, 9 of them. There you go. Perfect. How are they placed on that board? Are they voted in or are they appointed?
Appointed.
You got it. Not voted in. Be careful about that. I've seen that on some practice questions. We saw what they could do. They were in charge of education and discipline and the whole arbitration part of things, like handling investigations and the licensure, of course, which is what you're interacting with them about once we get through this class. So that's all the purposes and powers we've covered, and you can see them firsthand in the actual license law. Their disciplinary authority. What 4 things can the Real Estate Commission do to a licensee if they are judged guilty of something? What are the 4 possible ways you can be disciplined by the Real Estate Commission that does not include...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Is it reprimand?
Yes.
I think censor and suspend, revoke.
You got it. Those are the 4 main ones. The one that everybody in continuing ed gets wrong. Remember, these are practicing agents with licenses who have to take CE. I ask this question every time. They load it up. The first 10 or 20 answers in the chat are fine. Commission fines. That's wrong. It is incorrect to say that the Real Estate Commission will fine a licensee. I say that, and I immediately give you the one exception of when the commission will fine a licensee. The only kind of licensee that the Real Estate Commission would fine is a timeshare developer. Timeshare developer. So I don't know very many timeshare developers. I would bet there's not very many of them. So you don't really see it on the day-to-day. I don't even know if I've ever had one in my CE classes. But that's the only exception for, does the Real Estate Commission ever fine a licensee? Could you be fined from a different entity that you're involved with? Yeah, the MLS will fine you if you make some sort of remark in your MLS listing data for a house about a fair housing violation. If you were to say, this is a great studio apartment for a single person, 1 occupant, you just violated familial status category of the protected classes. You can't not let somebody, a single parent, live there because they have an underage kid. That's familial status. You can't say this is only for 1 heartbeat to live in this space. Nope. If they have a kid, you can't deny the child to live there too, because that'd be a violation of fair housing. Oh, here's an important section, D. The section D under this, it says general licensing provisions. Here's the good news. It's the most simple part of all this, but it's not something you're going to see mentioned in the comment section. That comment section PDF that I've harped on with you forever and ever, this thing, you're not going to find these 9 items in this thing. What are those 9 items? Let's keep going. It tells you so. This section is not discussed in the license law and commission rules, but must be covered. So what is it? What is a provisional broker? What are the pre-licensing and post-licensing education requirements? We already talked about it. What a provisional broker is what you're going to be when you first get your license, up to the point where you have completed 3 30-hour post classes within how much time? How much time does a provisional broker have to finish their 3 30-hour post classes? Close. It's in months, but it's more time than that.
18 months.
18 months, yeah. That is what the commission requires or gives as a maximum. But if you want to join a firm and that firm has decided, look, we don't really want too many provisional brokers hanging around for too long. We want them to hurry up and become non-provisional. So even though the real estate commission says you have 18 months, if you want to be at this firm, you have 12 months or 6 months. And that is up to them, and they have the right to do that. So if you agree to work there, you want to be at that firm because it looks cool, great logo, great presence in the community or whatever reason, that's just what you're going to have to agree to. So you'd have to hurry up and take those 3 classes quicker than the 18 months the commission allows for. The stricter thing takes precedence. Write that one down. Stricter wins. Stricter thing wins. We see this in just across the board in real estate, education, and out there in the wild. We're going to talk about it in the next couple of weeks, but for instance, zoning laws. What can you do with your property? The state has some zoning laws. So does the local counties and cities. They have zoning laws. And if the local city, even if it's some little tiny town that you live in, if your little town has a zoning law, like how many houses are allowed to be on 1 acre, and that is stricter than what North Carolina says, the stricter one wins. You have to follow the stricter one. Even though it's your own little tiny town, you might think, well, the state is more important or the state has more authority. And that's really hard to grasp when you think about federal laws. Federal, we're usually thinking that's big government, and so we have to follow that. Well, if the state or the local is more strict than the federal laws or rules, you got to follow the more strict one, regardless of whose law or rule that is. That makes sense? Stricter one always wins. We'll see that several times in this course. Provisional broker, okay. And then terminating that status. What happens if you don't get rid of your provisional status, if you don't take those post-licensing classes within 18 months? Well, if you are active, if you've activated, then you're going to become inactive. As soon as those 18 months click by and you didn't take your 3 30-hour post classes, you're not active anymore. And what's the first thing you have to do if you ever find your license has gone inactive? What's the first thing to do if your license goes inactive?
Take the same class.
Good answer. Not quite what I'm looking for because I don't want to say a tricky question, but I've seen it on the test. And they just want to belabor the point that before you do anything to remedy the fact that you went inactive, which you're correct, you do have to fix it somehow. But even before you do anything to fix it and take courses, whatever you need to do, the first thing you do is not do any real estate. Stop doing any real estate. Imagine this. You have run some Facebook ads. Anybody ever run Facebook ads or even click to boost a post in maybe some sort of job you have or entrepreneur or selling some sort of, I don't know, health type product or something? You can pay Facebook some money and they'll promote, right? Promote your ad. It's a video or some sort of static image you've created. If you've maybe gotten really efficient and decided to make a whole month's worth of Facebook posts promoting your real estate business, and then you somehow go inactive to tomorrow, you better remember to cancel all those future ads that are going to be coming out, because the next day when you're inactive and that Facebook ad runs, you just did real estate without a license, right? You promoted yourself as a licensed active real estate agent. So it's a big deal. The other one is you're working with a buyer and you've shown that buyer 47 houses. And after 6 months, they finally pick one. And you're right. You've just negotiated it. You got it under contract. You've scheduled a closing for 30 days away. And you're even closer to the closing now. It's like 2 weeks from closing, and you've had some inspections on the property. You've gone there several times. You've met repair companies there to give your buyer an idea of how much it's going to cost to fix the roof, because guess what? The seller won't fix it. They're not going to give any money to fix it because it's a seller's market. You're invested. But then you forget to do your CE, or you forget to do your post class. And then with 2 weeks to go before closing, your license becomes inactive. The first thing you have to do is stop doing anything on this file. You can't even call the client to tell them you are inactive. Your BIC is going to have to do it. Your broker in charge is going to have to tell them the bad news and take over for you or assign it to somebody else, because we can't just leave the client out in the lurch, right? We got to let somebody help them get through it. Can you still get paid if you are inactive? Is it still possible to get paid if you are inactive? And let me see if I've got it down here. Let me just fast forward down here. Show you the thing. Here we go. So first of all, when you've done the work, you must have an active license. So license must be on active status when the brokerage activity is performed. I hope you can see me highlighting that in real time there. The broker must stop all brokerage activity when the license expires or goes inactive. But here's the note. If the licenses of the firm and the broker were both on active status at the time that the brokerage services were rendered, that you did work, then you could still get paid the commission. The firm could still get paid the commission. You, the individual broker, if it's you only you who went inactive, even if your license went inactive at the time of payment, as long as the work was done while your license was active, you're okay to get paid. That makes sense? So maybe it's the week of closing. The only thing left is to show up to closing with your buyer. But the day before closing, your license becomes inactive. You wouldn't be able to go to closing. Your BIC would go for you, or send somebody else who does still have a license that's active. They could still choose to pay you. They might be mad at you. They might have something written up in their policy and provisions manual that says you might take a hit or have to pay some penalty. I don't know. I'm just making things up, but it could be there. But they probably wouldn't. But the main thing is you're inactive. You can't show up to closing. You're probably going to be embarrassed because you probably told your client, yeah, I'll be there with you, because a real estate commission says, don't be lazy, agents. You better show up to those closings. So that's a nice little nuance, important thing to know, because I would have guessed it wrong. So again, can you get paid when your license goes inactive? Yes. As long as when you did the work, your license was actually active and current. Notice I said both of those things, active and current, because active means you've done the education and kept up by the deadlines. Current means what? Thank you. I think Alfred, that was a few minutes ago, but it works. Alfred, your answer still works. Current means you paid the fees. So you paid your $45 to renew your license by June 30th. Being current versus expired is about the money. If you don't pay your $45 renewal by June 30th, then on July 1st, your license is expired. That is not the same thing as your license being inactive. Your license has to be both current and active for you to be able to do real estate and get paid for it. Well, no, not get paid for it. We just said that you could get paid on inactive status as long as you did the work while active. What else? Let's finish these general licensing provisions that aren't found in the comment section. So, side note, let's say that you get through this in July, you go active and you go ahead and pick a firm, you activate your license, and maybe you don't have much to do because you're a brand new agent. You go ahead and take one of those 3 post classes, 301 or 302. It doesn't be any order you want to take them in. I would suggest take 302 first. if I had to pick, because 302 is about contracts and closings. And the others are important, but these are what get you paid. Contracts and closings get you paid. Let's be practical and pay the light bill and learn about the deep dive of contracts and closings first. But again, your choice. Let's say you take 302 the first month you're in the business. Now you just have 2 of them left. If you somehow get really busy and don't take any post classes for 2 years, how could that happen? Well, you would have gone inactive at some point, right? Maybe somehow you go inactive, get some job opportunity, and you let the license go inactive. Here's the point. If you've taken a post course, it's only good for 2 years from the time you take it. Let's say, here's a better example. You don't go active. You do not activate your license. You could get that provisional license. Here we go. Use some graphics here. So you're going to pass the Pearson test. You pass the class exam. You pass the Pearson exam. And now you have an inactive provisional broker's license. Okay, hopefully you can see that. It needs to be a little bigger. That's what you have. You could just do this, but you still only have 18 months to take those 3 30-hour classes, post classes. So even though you've never activated yet, you better be working on these post classes, because it's going to take more to get up and running if you don't get them done by those 18 months. You don't have to take CE yet because you're inactive. So as long as you're inactive, the CE is not required. But once you decide to activate, and now you're an active provisional broker, same thing. You better be working on these post classes. And now you also need to be doing your CE after you skip your first June 10th deadline for CE. You don't have to do CE by your very first June 10th of having an active license, because you know all the laws and rules. You just learned them for 80 hours. What else? Sorry. So if you were inactive and went ahead and took your post, because a lot of times when I'm teaching a post class, there's a fair number of students in those post classes that never activated. They just they're choosing to go ahead and take all these 3 classes before they go active. But if they get distracted and they take a post 3.0 something, and then they go 2 years and they think, oh, all I have to take is 301 and 303 now, wrong. They're going to have to retake 302 because it's been over 2 years since they took it the first time. That's what this point is. We're going to finish this up and then launch into Unit 1 when I see you back here in 10 minutes. I'll see you back from break.
If you've tried installing new door hardware like this, you're doing it wrong. Try this hack. The right way to do it. The right way to do it. See that little tab there? See that little tab there? That detaches the knob. What? Makes it so much easier. Makes it so much easier. Now you can just put your screwdriver straight in. Don't strip the screws. Don't strip the screws. Share this video. If you've tried installing new.
You got a bag. You got a bag. Like.
Do you have a bag?
Like even a
Welcome back. All right. Let's see. Let's get through the rest of this part of the syllabus, and then I'm going to pick up on the slides. I'll have those slides uploaded to your Google Drive this week so you can have access to all of them. They were in there before, but we revamped, and I have to make sure they're uploaded again. So what else? License expiration and renewal. We just kind of talked about it. How much is it to renew your real estate license every year? Yeah, tell me in the chat or speak up, either or.
$45.
And that's due when?
June 30th.
June 30th. Perfect. What about continuing education? How many hours of CE do you have to take? And by what date?
June 10th.
June 10th. Perfect. June 10th, not June 30th, because the Real Estate Commission takes for themselves a blackout period of June 11th through 30th to kind of reset everything, get ready for the license year to begin again on July 1st. So it's June 10th as a deadline. And how many classes, how many hours?
8.
8 total hours, comprised of 2 classes, 4 hours apiece. And that is an update, some sort of an update, either called a general update or a BIC update. If you're a broker in charge or BIC eligible, you'll take the BIC up. If you're not, you'll take the Gen up. And those tend to run anywhere from $50 to $75 each. So we're talking about $100 to $150 for both. And again, for you as a brand new provisional, you don't have to take this by the first June 10th you'll come across. Active versus inactive status. That's what you'll be if you don't do your CE by June 10th. On July 1st, your license will go inactive. Not on June 11th, but July 1st. And then if you don't do the 30-hour post classes within those 18 months. So what's the deadline for the 3 post classes?
18 months.
From what point? 18 months from when?
Application.
From getting the license? Is that what you said? From when, when they send you your inactive provisional broker's license. Even if you never activate, you only have 18 months from that point to take those 3 30-hour classes. Payment of the fees, we talked about that. Proof of licensure, you have to carry around an image or a card showing that you have a real estate license. Let me show you what that looks like. Good news is somebody like me who forgets the card sometimes, they've made it really easy to get a new one. For $5, you can print a new one. Where did it go? There we go. And it looks like this. So straight from the Real Estate Commission, I can just do a screen grab or I take a picture of it with my phone and carry it around that way. Anytime I'm doing real estate, I need to be able to produce this. I have never been asked for this doing real estate, but you have to have it with you. Now, this is the Neil Pender human license. There's my license number in the lower left corner, and this shows that it expires on June 30th of 24. So it's the most recent one, and it's a broker, not a PB, but a full B, right? A B. By the way, I think I mentioned it to you in about 5 minutes time the first night. On the test, if you ever see a reference to the word broker without it saying provisional broker, you need to make sure your brain registers that as, oh, this is not a provisional broker, right? This question is about a full broker, a broker who has gotten rid of their provisional status. They're going to use probably the word broker all by itself. I wish they would write it out full or non-provisional broker just to kind of help your tired brain on that 3rd hour of the exam not get it mixed up, but they won't. So probably just going to use the word broker, and that's why this is just a B for broker. You will get one that says PB. And then I could also pull up, let me see, my firm pocket card. There it is. Because I have to have 2. I have 2 real estate licenses. I have 2 different pocket cards. There we go. And there's the other one. This time it shows my firm name. I've chosen to be an LLC, and there's my little firm license number in the lower left. So you'll just have the one. You'll just have the one that says PB until you set up an entity and get a firm license, maybe someday, although not required. Okay. Where else? We were back here. Proof of licensure. Change of name or address. These are easy points, guys. I see this stuff on test questions. If you change your name, get married, for whatever reason, change your name, change your phone number, email address, work address, firm affiliation, any of that identifying kind of info, The real estate commission requires you tell them about it. Update them with that new information within 10 days. They're going to mix it up on you and ask you, make it look like it might be 60 days. It's not 60, it's 10. Because the other thing is 60 days. If you are convicted of a crime, you have to tell the real estate commission within 60 days of the criminal conviction. And they just added a new one as part of the criminal conviction thing. If you are guilty of a military court-martial, that was lumped in with criminal conviction, and you have to tell the real estate commission within 60 days. So you only have 10 days to tell them you changed your name or your phone number, but you have 60 days to tell them that you are a convicted whatever. Here's how the test could mix it up on you. Sally was arrested for trespassing. How many days does Sally have to report to the commission about her arrest? And then
60.
it'll give you some choices. But notice
She hasn't been convicted yet.
there you go. There it is. The arrest is not a conviction. That's what they like to do to you. So don't fall for the arrest word. It's conviction. They might give you an answer choice that says the best answer choice could be she'll have to tell the commission within 60 days of being convicted for whatever that crime she got arrested for was, which may never happen. She might not be convicted of it. So it's the conviction. It's not arrest. It's not accusation. Bob was accused of something. How long does he have to tell the commission about this accusation? Doesn't. He didn't have to. Don't have to tell him about an arrest. You don't have to tell him about an accusation. Only have to tell him once it becomes a conviction. Okay. Supervision and compensation. We're just marching on through. Notice up here, level 3. This stuff is level 3. You have to have a more thorough understanding of this next bit. And we just went through all 9 of the things that are not going to show up in the comment section. So that's what that section D was. Things you won't see in the comment section. Okay. Broker supervision of provisional brokers. What is this? It just means that a provisional broker has to be very much tuned in with their BIC or vice versa. The broker in charge is very much responsible for the PB. So much so that they should know about every transaction you're involved with. That's why a broker in charge wants you to hurry up and not be provisional anymore. Get rid of that provisional status if at all possible, and they might require it sooner because it depends on how many PBs they have. If they have 20 of them, that might take all their time, and it's a lot to kind of handhold 20 provisional brokers. Do some do it properly? I'm sure they don't. I'm sure some aren't as tuned in with provisionals as they should be. But that's the basic requirement. What is a broker in charge? You have to have a broker in charge at every office location. Every office must have one. And then earning compensation. That broker in charge is the one essentially who writes your check to you. Your check and your income, your earnings have to flow through your broker in charge. In other words, you couldn't be paid by a different broker in charge. You've got to be paid by your own broker in charge. You couldn't even get a check from an agent in Virginia that wants to pay you a referral fee. They can't pay you that referral fee straight to you. They have to pay it to the order of your firm, who then will give you your piece. They might take a split from that referral fee, by the way. The last firm I was with was really nice. He didn't. He was nice, and when it came to a referral fee, he would not take his 15% split off the top that I paid him for normal income. Those splits, they're all negotiable. They vary between different firms. We'll talk about how to calculate those splits and do the math for it. But in terms of is there a standard split of a firm? No. The word standard is pretty much not a good word to use when it comes to commissions in general, because it's inaccurate and it's also illegal, not allowed to be called a standard 6% commission. That's the thing we're trained never to say, even though you see it out there in the wild a lot. So in order to get compensated, you know this, you have to have a current real estate license. You've renewed it on time. You have to also have an active license. You've done your education on time. You have to have in this case, we're talking about getting paid as a listing agent. You have to have a valid written listing contract. In other words, you can't be a listing agent for somebody unless it's in writing. You can't just say, hey, let me try to get your house sold. And they say, well, I don't want to sign anything. You wouldn't be able to let them not sign something. Oh, don't worry about it. Just let me show you what I can do. And you don't have to. Nope, not allowed. You have to sign a written listing agreement before you do any listing activity for someone. And then when would you be entitled to money? Tell me in the chat, when do you think you deserve to get your paycheck? Is it when the contract comes in and gets signed by everybody and you're officially under contract, or is it at closing, the final official closing? There's no reason for you to know this, but I find that when you make guesses, and especially if it's a wrong guess, I think it sticks in your memory better. So it's kind of good for memory purposes to guess incorrectly. And most people would guess closing. That is when you receive the money. But that's a difference between earning it and receiving it. Those are two different dates. You've earned it when you've done this thing in the Roman numeral 3, when you have procured a ready, willing, and able buyer. So let's look at a timeline. If you're listing the property, and here's the listing date, you list it, and you're so good at marketing that within 3 days, I'm just making that up, but it's actually realistic. 3 days, you go under contract. Under contract. Buyer comes along, made an offer. You help your seller negotiate that offer back and forth. Boom, it works out. Everybody agrees. Once they agree, everybody signs the paperwork, and then you've communicated to both sides that the signatures happened. We'll learn why that's important later, but you're in this under contract phase of time. The first little bit of the time is something called a due diligence period. We'll talk about what that means later. And then another chunk of time, finally, let's do it this way, is the closing. So this entire thing is the under contract period of time. An amount of it is going to be specifically called the due diligence period. And that just means that's the duration of time that you need to make sure that your client has had any inspections done, survey, the appraisal if you're on the buy side, inspection, survey, appraisal. And the buyer basically is looking and thinking about it, and for any reason they want to walk away, if they decide to walk away by this deadline date, then they're going to be able to get their earnest money back if they walk away while they're still within the due diligence period. We'll talk about this a million times. You don't have to, if that just kind of went over your head, don't worry about it. We'll come back to it. But my point is this. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. Here's our closing. This is the point at which a buyer came forth and you went under contract. And if this buyer is a cash buyer, meaning no loan has to be approved, then what you have procured as a listing agent for your seller client is a ready, willing, and able buyer. They were ready and willing because they came along and made an offer and it got accepted. They're able because it's a cash deal. Why did I make those separate? Because if it's not a cash deal, they're not able on this date. We don't know if they're able yet until maybe closer to around in here when the loan approval comes back. And the lender says, yep, we're going to give her the loan. Now they're able. Now this is the date that they became ready, willing, and able. They were already ready and willing. But if it came to a court of law and the deal fell apart and you had to sue your client for paying you a real estate commission, yes, that happens sometimes. I've never done it, knock on wood. More in commercial, I think, but it's certainly possible. And it would really be your firm that would sue them. But if the client was just being completely obstinate and difficult and they just wanted to bail on and you'd done all this work, spent all this money on photography and everything, and they just completely with disregard said, it's too bad for you. I'm out of here. I'm going to breach the contract. I'm going to walk away. Well, In addition to the other consequences they would have for breaching the contract to your seller, which includes being sued for specific performance and also having to reimburse the buyer for everything they've spent on inspections and everything, they also are at the risk of being sued by your firm for the commission, as long as it's provable that you procured a ready, willing, and able buyer. Were they able? Well, if they paid cash, they were able back here on this date. If they're getting a loan, they became able on this date when the loan got approved. Does that make sense? So if the test question says, when did you earn the commission? The earning came here or here depending on their finance situation. When did you get it? You get it at closing, but you've already earned it. And you have earned it probably days, maybe weeks before you actually received it. The receiving it is at closing. The earning it is at this point of ready, willing, and able buyer being procured. And those other things that we saw there in the syllabus. Here we go. Current and active license, valid listing agreement, procured a ready, willing, and able buyer, and that procuring cause doctrine. We'll talk about that. Procuring cause means that you are the reason that this thing happened. It is because of you that all these things fell into place. You are the procuring cause for this because you put the listing out there. The buyer came along because of your efforts, not necessarily your buyer, but you also put it in the MLS, which made it available to other agents in the MLS to bring a buyer to you, to your listing. So these four things happen. Now you have a legal claim to getting paid, being compensated. And that compensation is going to come in the form of a check written to your firm, and then your firm will give you your piece of that pie, so to speak. So when you go to that closing, you're probably not going to get your check while you're still there, by the way. Let's say you're closing this Friday at 10 a.m. You're going to show up. Your client's going to show up. You're going to sign some papers. Your seller is going to get out of there within 15 or 20 minutes. You'll be there, and then you'll both leave. Then the buyer will go in, probably separately, and they'll take more like 45 minutes to an hour or more because they have a lot more things probably to sign because it's probably a loan, a lot of loan documents. And they and their agent will do that. And then from that closing, and we'll go way more into depth with this when we get to the closing section, from the closing paperwork that gets signed, all that gets scanned and emailed and sent to the lender for them to look it over and make sure all the signatures and initials are in the right places. Then they say, okay, we'll release the money to you. And that big fat chunk of loan amount that buyer is borrowing gets released to the attorney. And now the attorney has this chunk of money. And they're going to use that money to pay various inspections that might still need to be paid, maybe a home warranty of $1,000 for the first-time home buyer for the buyer's first year. The commissions, the money to the seller, what's left over after paying all those different fees and expenses, the seller's net proceeds, and your commission. And that commission check is, again, not going to be to Alfred. It's going to be to whatever company Alfred works for. And Alfred's going to race across town and drive that check to his office and say, hey, office administrator, here's all my paperwork. Here's the check. Please give me mine. Can I get it today? Because we're in a hurry. We want to get our piece so we can cash it and deposit it, right? And hopefully most firms are pretty good about that turnaround, and you might even get it that same day. And then you'll get your check. They might even do a direct deposit and blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the gist of how that works and how we get compensated. What cannot happen is for the attorney to pay Alfred directly to his name. Got to be paid to the firm, and then the BIC on behalf of that firm pays him or pays you. With me? So that's earning commission. What else? An entitlement to the fee if the broker has fulfilled the contract duties, even when the contract doesn't close. We're going to see this in some future slides, but again, I want to impress upon you the importance of starting your studies with each unit in the syllabus. You see how detailed the syllabus is? There's a lot more than just vocabulary terms that you have to go find a definition for. And some sections are like that. Some of the topics are like this, very much content in this is like a very dense syllabus. So start here every time, like I'm doing with you now. They just go down the list. And what are you saying, Neil? You mean that we could be entitled to get paid even if the transaction falls apart? Yes. Is the client going to just pay us happily? Maybe not. You might have to enforce it by suing them over it. Again, knock on wood, hope you never do. But what if the seller just changes their mind? That's no fault of yours as their agent. It's no fault of the buyers. The buyer still wants to buy. You still want to get paid because you've already put all this upfront time and effort and money in it. But the seller, for some reason, maybe it's the seller or their spouse, and the one was really ready to sell, the other kind of was on the fence, but then they finally would put their foot down and said, I don't want to. Too sentimental, I'm not doing it. If a seller refuses to close, they are, I mentioned it a minute ago, opening themselves up to all kinds of penalties and consequences. And those first and foremost come from the buyer. The buyer could say, how dare you not close? I've done everything in good faith. So I'm going to sue you for specifically performing on this contract. Also, I've spent $5,000 on a variety of things, maybe $50,000, because that buyer has spent a big chunk of money maybe on the due diligence fee. Let's just add that up. Let's just see what that could look like just for fun. When they made their offer, they had to give a non-refundable deposit called due diligence fee. So I've seen those numbers easily be $20,000. I've even heard of one at $400,000 non-refundable deposit on a $400,000 sale price. A couple years ago when the market was so crazily competitive, it's still competitive, but not that bad. So let's just say $20,000 for due diligence fee. Let's just say another deposit called earnest money. And let's say that one is $10,000. And I'm just pulling these from air. These could be a lot more or a lot less. And then we have some inspections, like the general inspection could easily be $800. Maybe he saw some mold or fungal growth, and so we had a specialty inspection for mold, which is probably another $600 or $700 because it's going to cost maybe $300 to go out there and $100 per sample of this and that and the other. Again, just kind of pointing out. Uh-oh. Oh, my pen is misbehaving. So I got to use my finger on this one. Mold for $600. Let's say an appraisal. That's like $400. And a survey. There's another. Depends on how big the property is. If it's several acres, it might even be $1,000. But let's just say $500. Maybe they want a home warranty and the seller won't pay for it, so they get it, and it's like $900. So even just this, that seller refusing to close, is liable for reimbursing that buyer all of this money and getting sued for specific performance. And let's not forget the broker commission. Being sued by the broker to pay that commission, let's just say 6%. Could be 5, could be 4, could be 5.5, whatever. So that plus all of this, plus the suit for specific performance, big deal. It's a big deal. Now, when would a broker, a listing agent, who probably got pretty friendly with that seller, decide in this moment, seller, you're not going to close? Well, I'm going to sue you. They might not. But what if the buyer agent firm sues the listing firm for their buyer agency commission? Is that listing firm, out of the goodness of their heart, just going to pay that buyer agency portion to them just because they feel bad? No. They're going to now kind of have to sue their previous seller, to get paid so that they can pay out the lawsuit to the buyer's firm. Does that make more sense as to when the lawsuits could start flowing? I don't even want to talk about it. But things that could happen that would still give you entitlement to your commission is what this section is about. So refusing to close, the spouse won't sign, seller has an uncorrected defect in the title. We'll get more into that later, but if the title, in other words, the proof that you own the property, if there's some sort of cloud on the title or a defect in it that can't get remedied, then we can't close for some reason. Well, you're still due the commission because, again, you did all of these things, mostly procuring a ready, willing, and able buyer. Seller can't deliver possession within a reasonable time, whatever that is. That's going to come out in the trial or in the In the suit, seller insists on terms and conditions not stated in the contract. Well, they can't just pull things from air or other places and say, well, now I want a teddy bear. No, if it's in there, the thing that you signed, that's what you're expected to get. But don't start trying to make other demands just because you got mad all over again. And then the buyer and seller conspiring after the contract has been signed. In other words, maybe the buyer and seller start getting in touch with each other and they say to each other, you know what? We've been arguing about these repairs and we're really close to this deal falling apart. Let's just, since the agents aren't listening to this conversation, let's just let the deal fall apart and then you and I will get back with each other the next day after the agents are out of the way and we'll just split those commissions back between us. It's been known to happen, right? So if they conspire after the contract's signed and agree to cancel and you find that out, you would be entitled and have a way, a reason at least to go after them for the commission. Sharing of the broker's compensation, in-house sale. We'll talk about splits, but the policy and procedures manual with the firm is going to spell out what part you get and what part the firm gets. And what happens if another agent in your firm sells the property? That's what it means by in-house sale. It's not two different firms. It's all the sales happening within the same firm. It's your listing, and then that person who's in 2 desks down the row from you, same firm, has the buyer for your listing. That's an in-house sale. So how those splits are going to be determined is just up to the policy and procedures of the firm. The ability to get compensated is determined by that employment agreement that you signed back when you joined. And then again, both provisional brokers and full brokers are paid by their BICs. Flow of money flows through your broker in charge. So, other terminology. The in-house sale means what? In-house, your same firm. The buyer's represented by one of your firm agents and the seller's represented by another firm agent, or maybe you as well, called a dual agency situation. If it's 2 separate firms, it's called co-brokerage or a co-brokered sale. Your company and another company. And that other company right now, until we decide otherwise because of this lawsuit settlement, we're not going to play by those rules because they're not in place yet. But as of now, how does another company know what they're going to make, what you're going to share with them? If you've listed a property and they bring a buyer for that property, they know because you posted it in the MLS. And that's the good part about the MLS. That's why I'm going to miss it if this settlement goes through, because there's a lot of cases to be made that it's going to harm people in terms of being able to be to treat other people unfairly, because maybe somebody calls them on the phone and says, how much do you charge for how much do you pay for this commission? And maybe they give 2 different answers based on things they shouldn't base it on. Here is the MLS that we use. So if I do a search, and I always use this one because I know there's going to be something for sale in there. Just for fun, let's go with this first one. It's active. It's a neighborhood called Highland Creek in Charlotte. Oops. Oh, shoot. I undid what I just did. And it says the list price is $725 right there. So if I'm looking at this and I have a buyer that I think might be perfect for it because it's got 4 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, pictures look pretty good. There's a bunch more pictures we could look at. It's 4,521 square feet we can see down there. But if I go, all the way to the bottom and look over here, it's kind of, let me move this over. There we go. A little more to work with. Buyer agency, 2.5%. That means if the buyer is represented in writing by somebody that is their buyer agent, then we are agreeing to pay that firm that buyer agent works at 2.5% of the sale price in commission. Notice that it also says if it's a sub-agent helping the buyer, we're not paying them anything. We talked a little bit about agency last time and how confusing those terms can be. And I said something like the selling agent representing the buyer as a subagent to the seller, and everybody's mind blew up because it's just what happens. So in that case, selling agent helping the buyer, that means that's redundant. To say that is a redundancy because the phrase selling agent means they're helping the buyer. What we don't know with that phrase is how are they helping them? Are they helping them as their official buyer agent, which means they owe all of those fiduciary duties we looked at? Those 6 old CAR was the acronym, fiduciary duties. Or does that buyer refuse to sign the agency agreement and say, just help me put this offer together. I'm not going to hire you as a buyer agent. They can still help them. The agent can still help them, but what they're going to be helping them in the role of is as a sub-agent to the seller. But on this transaction, on this house, they've already looked ahead and they realize I can't do it this way for you, buyer, because the seller won't pay me if I'm a sub-agent instead of a full buyer agent. And so this is where we find out currently in these current rules what we're going to make if we sell this house. Now, this could be manipulated and handled poorly, improperly, unethically by agents. Some agents, they've gotten rid of it, but it used to be you could actually search. And I know this because I did it to make a point in class. But you could search and say, show me all the buyer agency commissions that pay at least 3%. And an unscrupulous, unethical agent would only show those listings to their buyer. Wrong. Don't do that. That's not okay. I think all the MLSs, or at least our MLS, has gotten rid of that search field. There's no way to search for buyer agency commission splits anymore. And I get it, because you don't want people to not give their clients access to properties just because they're not going to make what they want to make. But this is the main place where we tell other agents, other firms, what they would stand to make if they bring the buyer for this particular listing. We'll get more into that stuff later, but this is kind of how it works right now. We can just flip through all of them and say, okay, what else? What about the next house? This house is paying 3%. Oh, look at there. Still 0 if it's a sub-agent, but 3% to a buyer agent. Let's look at the next one. I bet it's either 2.5 or 3 because they tend to be. There's another 3. There's another 3. Oh, this time they don't care. They'll pay 3 even if you are a sub-agent to the seller. And that's a discussion for the listing agent to have with their seller client. In this case, they're paying 2.25% to the buyer agent, and again, 0 for sub-agency. So you can kind of see how that works. You can kind of, last year and the years before, in the last 3 or 4 years, I saw a lot of 2s and 2.5s, but I'm seeing more and more 3s again. Back when I got in the business in the 90s, a lot of 3s, sometimes bonuses, and all that has to be disclosed. The parties to the transaction deserve to know what the agents are going to be making. So any bonuses that you might be making or offered from a builder, for instance, have to be disclosed. And that's what that looks like. So any of these properties, we got all the details, all the pictures, plus the split. Now, the new lawsuit thing is going to get rid of this field. If that goes through, they're going to say no more are you allowed to tell the buyer agent what they're making on the MLS. Just on the MLS, though. We can tell them in other ways. So if I see that somebody showed my listing, I could reach out to them with a text or an email and say, by the way, the seller on this one is paying 2.5%. So we're just going to have to reroute information. It won't be a nice, handy, easy flip through and see what's up kind of situation. But side note, did it cross your mind when I mentioned that a while ago and you saw these differences that some are paying 2.5, 2.25, and 3? I've even seen 2 and sometimes 1, and sometimes a flat fee of like $1,000. What if you've put in 60 hours of your time as a buyer agent, expecting maybe 3, because 3% is what you've chosen to work for as a buyer agent? That's your right. You have all the right in the world to decide what you're worth and fight for it. It's also the privilege of your firm to have a say in the matter too. So if you don't like what your firm limits you to making, they're happy with you making as much as possible, but they might not let you cut your commission, but only so much. If it means trying to make a deal happen, sometimes we want to negotiate down, and I'll do that for a client if I'm getting a listing and helping them buy and sell. I'll get a little more creative and maybe give them a discount on one part of that. But that's up to, first of all, your firm's rules, allowing it or not. So how fair does that sound to you? You've potentially put in 60 hours and you find out, oh, the house they picked is paying me $1,000. And you were kind of counting on 3% of a $400,000 sale price. Here's the way buyer agency compensation currently works. When you sign the buyer agency agreement, it says in the agency form, hey, buyer, I'm going to try my best to get paid from the seller's side, because that seller has listed the property with an agent. That agent has agreed to maybe pay me. You get my full fiduciary responsibilities. I'm going to keep your secrets. I'm going to negotiate hard to make sure you get the most house for the money. But I could and most likely will get paid from the seller's side. Seller's going to share. The seller's agent, listing agent, is going to share their commission with me. They're not making 6. They're going to split that 6 in some way with me. Maybe evenly, 3 and 3, maybe 2 and 4, maybe 2.5 and 3.5. And maybe it doesn't add up to 6. Maybe it's 5 or 4. But some way they're going to pay me. But if they don't pay me the full amount that I work for, because I've chosen that I only do buyer agency for 3%, as an example, then I'm going to need you to make up the difference. And you have to get good at explaining your value, your worth, so they are okay with that. Usually they are, because most of the time you're okay with what the seller's paying their agent, and their agent's going to share with you. But if you for some reason didn't, your only other option is to get paid the difference from your buyer. This is also part of why we're in this lawsuit mess, because agents ran away from this discussion and didn't have it properly. Have you ever talked to an agent about buying? Have you ever heard the phrase, oh, don't worry, you can get a buyer agent and they work for free. It's free to you because they're going to get paid by the seller. That was the wrong way to explain it. Properly, in North Carolina at least, you should have explained it the first way. Hey, probably going to get paid everything I require by the seller, but if I don't, I'm going to look to you, buyer client, for the difference, right? But can you imagine how awkward that is to maybe talk to a brand new client, potential client? That's why agents ran and probably still do run away from that explanation. They just don't feel confident enough to have it. And here's the mess we're in. But anyway, that's how we know in a co-broker sale what we're going to make. So therefore, we'll know how much to ask our buyer for. Hey, buyer, sorry, they're only paying 2%, and I do buyer agency for people for 3%. We've written 85 offers together. So do you agree that I'm worth it? I'm still here with you. We're 90 hours into this thing. So hopefully they'll understand. So that's what this means. The ability to receive compensation from the listing company is negotiated between the parties because there are cooperative listing service agreements through these MLSs. Co-brokerage with a broker license in another state. So what does this mean? And we'll see this in slides properly later. But again, it's in the syllabus here, and so I just want to cover a couple of these things. What if your grandmother, so let's say you live in Virginia, and your grandmother wants to retire in Charlotte. You could call me, and you're an actively licensed broker in Virginia. You could call me, find me on the internet and say, hey, Neil, I'm sending my grandmother down there to Charlotte to live in a 55 and older community. Could you help her find something? And would you pay me a referral fee since I'm trusting you with my grandmother's well-being? I would say, absolutely. I'd be glad to pay you a referral fee for the chance to work with your grandmother as a client. How much is that referral fee? You'll negotiate it. But for your information, guys, I've seen of paid and received referral fees at 20% of the commission, 25% of the commission, maybe 30%. More of these companies, corporate relocation companies that send you leads and want referral fees, are charging 30, 35, 40. I've heard of 50% referral fees, all negotiable. If you get on the list and they keep sending you the business, maybe you're okay with 40 or 50% referral fee, but to pay them to send you leads and it's a steady stream of leads, it's your business. You and your firm have a business decision to make. But if you're that agent who's active in Virginia and you say, send in my grandmother now. If you went on to say, well, she is my grandmother, I'm not just going to put her on a bus. I'm going to drive her to North Carolina myself. And I look forward to meeting you, Neil, and driving around with you, riding around with my grandmother in the backseat of your car while you show her properties, because I'm licensed in Virginia. I will say, welcome. I look forward to meeting you, but if you do choose to do that, I can't pay you a referral fee. That's what this is about. This section, Roman numeral 3, says that if you're an out-of-state broker, and that's all they mean by foreign, they just mean not North Carolina. If you're an out-of-state / foreign broker, and you have, in order for me to pay you a referral fee, you have to be actively licensed, whatever state you're in. I'm paying you a referral fee, but you cannot come here to North Carolina to engage in brokerage activity related to the transaction. Can you come to North Carolina at all? Sure. Come to North Carolina, go to the beach, have fun, but don't come to North Carolina expecting to get in the car with me and your grandma. Because we know that as a real estate agent in Virginia or anywhere, you will not be able to help yourself and keep from giving her advice on real estate. And the problem with you being in the North Carolina border giving real estate advice is you're not giving North Carolina real estate advice because you don't have a North Carolina license. The Real Estate Commission is very careful about that. They say, don't come here and try to be a part of it. You got to trust the agent you're getting the referral fee from. And if you don't, and if you insist on driving her or whoever the person is, doesn't have to be your grandma, whoever that person you're referring, don't engage in North Carolina real estate. You can't help it. It's just something we do. If we're good at something, we're going to try to help people at it. Does that keep grandma from going back to her hotel after that first night and calling you and saying, hey, here's what we did today? No, and I can't do a thing to stop it. So we're not like we're going to bug the room or knock on the door or enforce it in some way. It just means that I can't knowingly let you come here and be in my presence when I'm doing real estate with the person you referred to me and still pay you a referral fee. With that said, what if it is your grandma, you're very protective and you're like, I don't care what you say, I'm coming. I'm driving her there. I'm going to ride in the car with you to show, okay, fine. But I can't pay you a referral fee if you do. You see how that works? That's what it's about. It's about the referral fee. Some of you probably have the wheels turning in your brain right now and you're thinking, okay, where's the loophole? Here is the loophole. Don't take the referral fee. Let me just pay grandma herself a rebate in the amount of that referral fee, because what were you going to do with that referral fee? If you were going to use it to turn around and give to grandma, problem solved. I'm able to give her the money you were going to give her because of the referral fee, and I'll just rebate it to her, right? And then you can come on with her because I'm not paying you. That's the thing I'm not allowed to do, is pay you a referral fee for being in a part of that transaction. So that's what this rule is about. What else? As a buyer agent, what are the qualifications required? Current license on active status, same thing. Valid written buyer agency contract, very similar to the listing thing that we just looked at. Procurement of the property described in the agreement. In other words, what does that buyer agency agreement say you're going to help them with? It might say, I'm going to help you find houses in Charlotte or maybe Raleigh or whatever. Whatever it says, and you came through with it. Here are the 3 possible ways you can get paid as a buyer agent. You could get paid a retainer fee, like an attorney gets paid a retainer fee. I don't know many agents who charge this, but some agents, more likely it's a listing agent, but it could be a buyer agent who says, look, I'm so busy. I'm so good at what I do, and I have such a good reputation. The people are lined up out of the door to work with me. Therefore, if you want to have that valuable spot for me to give you my time, you've got to pay me a $500 retainer fee just so I'll start working with you. Maybe I'll take that off of what I end up getting paid by you at the closing. Maybe I'll credit it toward the rest of what I'm going to get paid. But a retainer fee would just be that. More likely, what you're going to make is the thing called the success fee for the being successful in actually closing, essentially. You earned it when you produced the ready, willing, and able buyer, but you made it, you received it at closing. That's the success fee. Or, and that success fee could be all of it provided by the seller by way of their listing agent who is sharing it with you. Or maybe the seller won't even pay a fee at all. And if this settlement thing goes through, that's a very real possibility. Some sellers might say, forget it. I'm just paying my listing agent. I'm not paying a buyer agent at all. In which case, we would get paid completely from our buyer. So we just have to get good at explaining that. So it could be a retainer fee from the buyer. It could be a success fee straight from the buyer. Or it could be that you're sharing in the listing broker's fee, which is the predominant way it's been done for many years. And I'd say 99% of the time, this is where that money buyer agent's making is coming from. And it could be a combination of these, probably between the buyer agent paying some and the listing broker paying some. I sold a new construction a couple of years ago, and I was expecting it to be like 2.5% commission on about a $600,000 house. But that builder had just implemented across the board that they just pay a flat $4,000 commission. And if you do that math, I was expecting, let's see, 600,000 times 2.5%, $15,000 is what I was expecting. And I get there to fill out the forms, and they say, hey, on this one, since we're building it from scratch out of the ground, we're paying a flat fee of $4,000, basically a fourth of what I would have made in a typical same kind of transaction only 5 years earlier. And I did it, and I didn't fuss about it because I'm helping my client. And by the way, they've used me 12 times over the years, so it's like, let's just keep the momentum going. They also used me in that same time range to help them sell what they were living in order to buy this one. So not happy about it. I could have asked them for somewhere in between the 15 and the 4 that I got from the builder, right? I could have said, look, guys, I do this for 2.5%. The builder's only giving me 4,000. 2.5% would be 15,000. I'm going to need some money from you too. I could have chosen to try that. See what I'm saying? So that would have been a combination of these things. We talked about this one already. You could get paid even if you're expired or inactive, as long as you were not expired or inactive when you actually did the work. But you could get paid later, even though you're not active. But the services can't have been done while inactive. That is license law and commission rule stuff in the syllabus. Now, we're going to take our break. And when we come back from the break, we're going to get into the slides, but the slides are going to be in this part of the syllabus. So on your own between today and tomorrow, now and next week, hopefully you've already gone through this part of the syllabus, but this is what we're going to flip over to the slides and cover. I've got this. They're easier to look at. They're prettier. They have pictures, but I would highly suggest that you just do this for everything. Read the syllabus section first. Sometimes it'll be very minimalistic like this. Sometimes it'll be much more involved like that. But do the syllabus first so you'll know what for your eyes to kind of key in on certain terms when you're reading through the yellow book and the other materials. So see you back here in 10. Let me clear up last couple slides from that first section we were working on last week. We've already talked about these 4 phrases, so hopefully you read those first 9 pages of the comment section that went into depth on that. We'll leave that up to you. Talk more about that another time. Oh, good. It did it for me. There we go. Okay. And let's finish out these slides. Then we'll get into Unit 1, basic real estate stuff. So here's the other things we can't do. Agents are not allowed to make promises they don't keep. There's an example in the current CE course that says an agent told their buyer client that the seller and listing agent told them the heating and air system was brand new. Come to find out, the inspector said it was not. It was in bad shape. The agent said, well, if you'll go through with the transaction, I will promise to pay you $5,000 toward replacing the system. That is actually okay. It's allowable for that agent to pay their buyer whatever they want, as long as the firm allows it. But as far as legality, that's okay to pay a party to the transaction. The problem arose in this case where the closing took place, but the agent never actually gave them the money. They did not come through with their promise to pay $5,000. That's the problem. So making promises we don't keep is a prohibited act. Improper commissions, paying somebody without a license, hiring an assistant, letting them do things that they're not allowed to do, and then so paying people for doing real estate when they don't have a license to do so. Unworthiness and incompetence, we're going to see a version of that when we get into the agency fiduciary duties. We saw it was the last item of the acronym old CAR: reasonable, skill, and care. We are responsible for knowing how to do the business, what forms to use, all the things you're going to learn from your first firm, your first pick. And being unworthy or incompetent to do the work would kind of fall into that bucket, so to speak. What forms to use, how to behave. Another thing we can't do is solicit other agents' listings, other agents' clients. You should never try to, it's called tortious interference. You can't try to steal people's clients, poach them. And then discriminatory practice. We owe to our client to educate them on what is discriminatory behavior. Because if we do something that violates fair housing laws, our client could get in trouble for that. And if our client does things to violate fair housing laws, we could get in trouble for it as well. That's how serious it is. And if it's determined that you get fined for it, not by the commission, but in the course of a discrimination suit, it's automatically 3 times the amount. Treble the fines. The fines are trebled because it's a fair housing thing. So we're responsible for all of that stuff and knowing how to educate them on what is allowable and not allowable. We're not attorneys. I've told you that already. We're going to see that a lot, especially when we get to the contracts. We can't make contracts from scratch. We can't create or draft legal language because we're not attorneys. We need to hire attorneys or have our clients hire attorneys for those purposes. And then it's kind of funny, the commission built in this extra rule that says any violation of any rule is a violation of the rules. I'll pause for that to sink in. So we need to know what the rules are so we know what not to do. And that's why this entire course is basically about rules and laws. Lying about anything. And then finally, this last one. What is it called if someone does try to do real estate without a license? How do we go about tattling on them, turning them in, seeing that they are somehow penalized for this? Well, the real estate commission would go after them and sue them for injunctive relief. The commission goes after somebody who's trying to do real estate without a license. Again, who is the real estate commission designed to protect? Who are they in existence for protecting? They're not there to protect us. They're there to protect who?
Buyer.
Yeah, the client, the consumer, for the consumer's well-being. Therefore, it is in the consumer's best interest to get people who aren't qualified to help them out and keep them from doing real estate without a license, because a lot of the laws and rules are designed to protect the consumer. So that's what injunctive relief is designed to do. We know this already. We could surrender our license if we had to get disciplined. We could say, you know what? I did a wrong thing and I don't even want to do this business anymore anyway. Let me just turn my license back in and I'll go do something else. So we could surrender it, and we could be reprimanded, censured, suspended, or revoked. And it could be that any of those things maybe have a condition. A lot of times the condition we'll see is attached to the suspension. One second. Whoo, sneeze. And it says the suspension was suspended. In other words, you're going to be suspended and not be able to do real estate if you don't fulfill this condition. What condition? Probably taking a class. Like if what you got in trouble for was not explaining properly how agency works, disclosing agency properly to your client, and you get turned in for that because the client is mad about something. In the investigation, the commission finds out you didn't handle your agency disclosures right and get things signed properly. They might make you take an elective 4-hour course about it. They might make you take the 30-hour post-licensing course about agency. So some sort of condition so that you can keep practicing. And then this is a big one when it comes to trust accounts. The big thing, the big testable item about trust money is we can't mix other people's money with our own money. That's called commingling. That's the big no-no. So it's got to be kept in another account. If we are holding if we have a trust account at our firm, we're holding other people's money, what money is going in that trust account? Well, when the offer is made, there's 2 checks that get written when the offer becomes a contract. One of them is for due diligence money. And that is a negotiable number. It could be, we've seen it already. I've seen 1,000, I've seen 500 back in the day, and I've heard of 400,000. It's a negotiable amount, and it's payable to the seller. Due diligence money goes to the seller. We don't put this in an earnest money account or a trust account. I'll say it again. We don't put due diligence money in the trust account. Because it goes directly to the seller once the contract becomes a contract. Here's the one that goes into the trust account. The earnest money is put in the trust account because it needs to just sit there out of the buyer's reach. Because the buyer is saying, I am so serious about my intentions of buying this property that this is good faith money. Another word for earnest money is good faith money. Here comes another sneeze. I'll try to catch it. So earnest money, good faith money goes into this trust account. It needs to be held somewhere out of the buyer's reach so that they can't go spend it. So the seller knows, okay, well, they are subject to maybe losing that earnest money too if the buyer chooses not to go through with this and tries to breach and not go through with the purchase outside of the due diligence period that we talked about. We'll get more into that later. But the earnest money is what's going to possibly be commingled if we were to put it in our operating account. Not okay. Instead of an operating account, it has to be a bank account that we have labeled as a trust account. And all this is said if we choose to have one, because thank goodness firms can choose not to hold earnest money, not to have a trust account. And I don't, because I don't want to deal with it. So it's not required, but if we do have one, there are rules that we must follow. We'll get more into them when we get further into the comment section, because it's in that license law material. And the last couple things here, when we're advertising, our BIC, our broker in charge, is responsible for how well we do, not how productive the ad gets, but did it violate what it's not supposed to say? There's 2 things that we have to be careful about with an ad in terms of violating things. It can't be an ad that secretly is run by you. You're listing the property and you run the ad you have to disclose that you're a broker and what your firm is. If you don't, it's called a blind ad and it's not allowed. And so our BIC has to make sure we're trained on that. And the BIC might even require that you run every ad by them before you run it. You get their approval before you run it. Or they might say, I'm way too busy for that. Let me just put you through a little training course, make sure that you know what you're supposed to do and what we expect. And then I'm going to check in from time to time, make sure that you still keep doing it right. That broker in charge is responsible for every broker, both the provisionals and the non-provisionals, when it comes to advertising properly. So no blind ads. You must have it in the ad that you are a broker and what firm you're with. And then the other part of ads is no fair housing violations. We mentioned the example earlier of bungalow in Charlotte near the Jewish Community Center. That would be a violation because by mentioning religion, you could be misunderstood that only Jewish people are going to be welcome to buy that house. So the other fair housing categories, I think I rattled them off before: race, religion, color, national origin, sex, which includes sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, familial status. I think that's all 7, plus the detailed ones in the sex category. Delivery of documents. Here's another highly testable one. When we get something signed by our client, we need to provide it to our client so they have it for their records within 3 days. 3 days, no later than. Here's the best answer: immediately. So if the answer choices are like this: hey, when do you have to give your client the contract they signed? And the answer choices are A, B, C, D: immediately, 3 days, 5 days, or 7 days. The best answer out of those would be immediately. But if the answer choices were not immediately, but just 3, 5, 7, or 9, the best of those choices would be 3. So drop dead not later than 3 days, but preferably immediately, because we have no reason not to do it immediately now compared to 20 years ago or maybe 30 years ago. In order to get something to them, maybe a fax machine was the fastest. Oh, I'm so glad they're gone. I hated fax machines. Nobody had ones that worked. The client's machine always worked wrong, and you had to still go drive it to them and blah, blah, blah. But with email and electronic signing, there's no excuse for not having almost near immediate delivery, right? So a lot of the 3-day stuff that we'll run across is because it's left over from when we had to mail things through the U.S. Postal Service. So that's still around. We still have not later than 3 days, but best practice right away. And then here's another highly testable thing. The Real Estate Commission requires that we keep all the records of our transaction for 3 years in some way or another. It could be print it all out, kill a whole bunch of trees, and have 2 inches thick worth of documents that you stick in a moth-proof container. Or it could be off-site, in a cloud, on a zip drive, or it could be a combination of those things. They don't care how you do it, just be able to produce it if they need to investigate and ask you for something within 3 years of the transaction going away. So we'll get more into one way to handle that later, but the 3 years for transactions, files. What about, should you keep it longer? The commission just expects 3 years for their satisfaction, but what if you got sued or became party to some situation 5 or 10 years down the road? Since it's not taking up any space on your desk or in your file cabinet, especially if it's electronic anyway, probably best practice, just personally, business-wise, is to just keep them longer than that, right? But the commission, the testable thing is 3 years. Talked about this part a little bit. Brokerage fees, you got to have permission of the owner and the BIC as to what you're going to make. So when you list a property, it specifically says, here's what I'm going to charge you. And the owner has to agree to it. If they don't, then you can't do it, right? And if they won't and you insist, then you might just have to walk away. That's the best, most powerful position to be in. Hey, seller, here's what I charge. I don't want to pay it. Okay, well, nice meeting you. Part ways as friends. I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding an agent that'll do it for $3, but it's not me, right? So owner would agree. Your BIC would agree. The BIC, broker in charge firm rules, might say, look, if you want to negotiate your commission down, because maybe you're going to help them on both sides of a transaction, meaning you're helping them sell a house, but then also help them buy the next house. I know I would do it. I'd be okay with giving them some kind of a discount on one or the other of those ends of the transaction. But your firm might say, okay, we'll let you negotiate down or discount something, but as long as it's no less than 5% commission on the listing. We'd rather you do 6 because that's what we charge around here. But if you need to go to 5 in this certain case, we'll let you do it. So the broker, the firm might have rules about that. Can you say my firm charges 6% as a standard commission? It's my firm's commission. Yes, you can. You can say the firm charges this number. You can say I charge this number. You could say the firm charges 5, but I do it for 6 because I'm worth it and I'm the best one. So a single agent, a single firm could say and declare this is our commission rate. What you can't do, the thing you can't do that violates the Sherman Antitrust Act is say the standard rate across the whole industry is X amount. That's the thing that's not allowed. Do you see the difference? So you could say, I do it for 6 all day long. You just can't say every agent in Charlotte does it for 6. Okay? We know this one already. Can't draft legal documents. Look for draft. The word draft means you made it. What we are allowed to do is fill in the blanks of already created forms. And then any offers that we get as a listing agent, for instance, or as a buyer agent when it's a counter offers going back and forth. We made an offer and they didn't accept it, but they countered. If we receive some sort of an offer or counter offer, we need to immediately tell our client as soon as we can. Certainly not let it linger forever and ever and ever. So any offers presented to, given to the agent need to be informed. The seller or buyer needs to be informed about those offers right away. And then these last 2 points, people still get wrong in CE classes, guys. Even 20-year agents get these things wrong. Let me set the stage. If we have a multiple offer situation and you're the listing agent and an agent calls you and says, hey, you know, we had that pre-licensing class together all those years ago. We both passed and so glad to see you're in the business and doing great. We have that weird instructor, Neil, and I'd love to work with you on this transaction. I'm just curious, are there multiple offers? My buyer's wanting to know, are there multiple offers on this house? If they ask you that and you're the listing agent, you cannot answer it without your seller's permission. You can't just say, because you might be inclined to think, well, that would be great. If we have multiple offers, we want to tell the whole world because it'll make them more likely to hurry up and make an offer so they can be competitive. But what's the downside of telling people that there's multiple offers? When might it be a bad idea to do that? Downside of telling people automatically, yeah, there's multiples is what if that buyer has tried 10 in a row and lost all 10? And they told their agent just today, look, I kind of like this new listing that popped up, but if there's multiples, I'm exhausted. I just cannot compete with other offers anymore, and I don't even want to try. And that might have ended up being the best offer your seller client would have gotten. So best practice on the listing appointment, way back early in the process before offers come in, talk about it. Say, hey, seller, we might get multiple offers. What do you want me to do if I get called and they ask me, are there multiple offers on the table? My advice to you, seller, is here's my advice as a business person. This is what I choose to advise. I like to say, hey, seller, don't give me advice. Don't give me permission. I want the seller to specifically tell me not to disclose it. Because you call me and you say, are there multiples? I want to be able to legally, ethically say, I'm sorry, my seller has not given me permission to discuss that. Now we don't run the risk of scaring off a buyer that's kind of scared of being in a competitive environment because we're there to protect our client. right? We're not there to help that buyer get accepted. We're there to make sure our client gets the most money, best terms, price, and conditions for their property. And so if we run away a potential buyer because they don't want to do multiples, we've harmed our client potentially. So that's it. Whose permission do you need as a listing agent to disclose that there's multiple offers? You need the seller's permission. So that's one thing. File that away. Make a note about that one. Here's the other one. What if they call you and say, hey, are there multiples? And you don't have permission and you say, I'm not allowed to tell you. And what if they go on to say, okay, I get that, but if there are multiples, come on, you know me from that pre-licensing class. I'd love to work with you. Let's put this deal together, make it happen. Wink, wink. What is it going to take for my client to win? What number do we have to come in with to beat the highest offer currently on the table? Can you give them that number? Can you just immediately tell them? No, you need somebody's permission. Could you tell them if you had the right permission? Yes, theoretically, you could tell them the answer. You could say, yep, current highest offer, we got 13 multiple offers, and we're currently at $750. List price was $650. We're up to $750. That's the number you need to beat. You could give them that information, but you won't, because the permission you would need is the one who made the $750 offer. It's not for the seller to give you permission to disclose this information. It's for the one who made the highest offer to give you that permission. And nobody is that stupid, right? Nobody's going to tell you how to beat them. And so it's the offeror. That's the official term for the one making the offer. The offeror making the highest offer. It would be them who you would have to get permission from. So if the test question was this, can you disclose the highest offer on the table in a multiple offer situation? And that's it? The answer is yes, I could. But under what conditions? Under the condition that the one who made that highest offer allowed me to disclose it. And some agents get in trouble for this because they let it slip. They're just trying so hard to get the offers higher and higher. You can't shop offers that way. Because unless you have permission from somebody to disclose what their offer is, you are not allowed to tell it. So that's what these last two things mean. It's not up to the seller. People get this wrong all the time in continuing ed. When I go through it and I try to help them out and give them little clues, but I say, hey, whose permission do you need to disclose that there's multiple offers? And they'll say the seller's. And I'm like, great. Okay, whose permission do you need to disclose the highest offer on the table? And they'll say the seller's. And then I have to explain it for 5 minutes like we just did. No, not the seller, the one who made that highest offer. Okay, let's talk about BICs. Each firm must have one. We already know that. If you are not an entity, if you don't have a firm license, having an entity like an LLC requires that you have a firm license. So if you don't have any of that stuff, you could still do real estate. And that's what you're going to be. You're going to be a sole proprietor at some point. And a sole proprietor still needs a broker in charge. As long as you're doing any of these three things. If you're going to hold trust money, have a trust account, you need a BIC. It could be yourself. It could be someone else that you hire. If you're going to do any advertising or promotion, you need a BIC. If you're going to have associates or affiliated brokers reporting to you, you need a BIC. So in other words, could there be a sole proprietor who does not have a BIC or need a BIC? Yes. You could do this business to a small degree if you're a sole proprietor and you do not have a broker in charge. Because maybe you've been doing real estate for 40 years and people know that you did it. And you're kind of in your retirement years, but you'd still show houses if you needed to. As long as an unsolicited buyer called you and said, hey, I know you used to do real estate. Do you still? And they came to you. You didn't go after them. You didn't advertise or promote, but they landed in your lap, so to speak. You could help that unsolicited buyer and be a sole proprietor without a broker in charge. But the minute you print a business card or make a Facebook post, you have promoted or advertised, and now you're a sole proprietor that needs a BIC. You violated the rule if you don't have a BIC. It could also, and more likely, be this one. It could be that they call you and say, hey, you were in real estate forever, right? You still in it? Yeah, I still have my license. I want to move to Arizona. Can you connect me with an agent and refer me to a good agent out there? And you explain, well, yeah, I could. And that agent could pay me a referral fee because I connected you with them and let them help you. So receiving that referral fee requires a license. You can receive that referral fee. You can be a sole proprietor with no broker in charge as long as they came to you and asked. You didn't proactively say to the world, hey, world, either through a Facebook post or a business card, hey, call me for all your referral needs. I don't list or show or sell anymore, but I'll send you a great agent or connect you with a great agent across the country or across the world. Nope. The minute you promoted or advertised that you could do that, you violated this and you now have to have a BIC. But if they just came to you and asked for the referral to be referred to an agent in West Virginia, then you're still okay. And you can be a sole proprietor without a BIC. But if you want to do any sort of a volume of business, you basically need to have a broker in charge or be one yourself for your own firm. But that's what this loophole is. A sole proprietor needs a BIC if any of these three things are happening. And then finally, what is this broker in charge person? How do you become one? Some of you might decide to have your own firm, your own company someday. And so you might initially be a broker in charge of it yourself until you decide not to. I'm a broker in charge, but I have the best and worst affiliated broker under myself that you could ever hope for because it's myself. All right, I'm pretty easy on myself, but I'm also kind of demanding sometimes too. But at least I know what I'm all about and I get to keep all the money. What does it take to be a broker in charge? You have to be actively licensed. You have to not be a provisional broker. That makes sense. You should probably have some experience under your belt. And that experience full-time is at least 2 years. You could also be a BIC with some part-time experience, but it's going to be 4 years part-time. Some people ask, what does that mean? How do you prove your experience? It's a combination of things. The commission's going to say, how many transactions have you done these last 2 years or for these last 4 years on a part-time basis? And maybe letter from your current BIC or maybe some sort of proof. If you had a full-time job as a corporate executive in a plastics company, it's going to be hard for them to believe that you did 2 years of full-time real estate. They're just probably not going to believe it. And so now you're probably going to have to prove 4 years part-time. And that might still be hard to believe, but it's a combination of things. But that experience is important. And then there's about, I think it's $110 course, the 12-hour broker in charge course. And it's 3 modules of 4 hours. Is that how that works? Yeah. 3 4-hour modules. It's self-directed. You pay the commission. You log in. You watch the videos. You read the slides, and you eventually complete it. And that's the BIC course. And then if you go ahead and take, if you go ahead and take that BIC course, then you have an entire year to declare yourself broker in charge or just BIC eligible. If you want to just be eligible to become a BIC, same requirements. So being a broker in charge is one thing. Being BIC eligible is a very similar other thing. The difference, one of them means you're in charge of people. The other one means you're ready to be, but you're not yet. You're just choosing not to be yet. But if you had to, you could fill out an online form and within 5 minutes time, be the BIC of a firm. That's being BIC eligible. All of these requirements are the same for either situation. So if you go ahead and take the 12-hour course, you have an entire year to declare yourself BIC or BIC eligible. If you go ahead and declare yourself BIC, like I did in 2018, April of 2018, I went ahead and set up my own firm, declared myself the BIC of that firm. In that situation, I had 120 days to finish, to complete the 12-hour course. So the time frame, depending on when you take the course, is what we're talking about here. If you go ahead and take the course, you have a whole year to declare yourself. But if you go ahead and declare yourself, either because you started your own firm and so you had to say, yeah, I'm the BIC, or maybe you went to an existing firm and they hired you in order to make you the BIC. Either case, if you have been declared broker in charge, you have 120 days to hurry up and take the course. You need to hurry up and learn what it is to be broker in charge. Take the course from them. But it's kind of cool of them to give you 4 months, 120 days to go ahead and do BIC things. And hopefully, in my case, April was when I did all this. And the first 3 or 4 BIC courses, because it had to be in person back then, even just that short time ago, were full. So I finally found one in July that just squeezed under that 120-day wire. And I was a little nervous that everything would work out and I'd remember to take it and go there and blah, blah, blah. What else? And then the only thing left to maintain your BIC or your broker in charge eligible BIC or BIC eligible status is to you don't have to pay extra money. You pay the same money as you would pay to take a general update course, but instead of taking the Gen Up continuing elective update course, you're going to take the BIC Up version. And they're the same thing, except we shorten all the modules enough to make about a 30-minute BIC only section that we'll add into it. And it's usually pretty minimal, like, hey, don't forget to update your policy and procedures manual. Here's what that looks like. And any sort of other BIC specific sorts of things that they might decide the commission might want to make sure everybody's reminded about. Okay, that is the first little bit of license law commission rules. Let's go into, let's get these basic things under our belt. And we are now in Unit 1 of the Yellow Book, which should be that last, let me see here. This part of the syllabus, which should be page 6, section 3. We're going to get into real property characteristics as well as legal descriptions and how we can use property. So this is where we are in the syllabus, and then this is where we are in the slides that I'm going to share with you this week when I get them uploaded. There we go. So compare the syllabus to the slides, and again, read things before class, if at all possible. Read them again, maybe skim over them after class. Answer the questions at the ends of those yellow textbook chapters so that you can get a review. Some of those questions, though, on the quizzes might be irrelevant because, remember, the textbook is this big 800-page monster, and you don't need to know all 800 pages. You need to know however much of that book is covered in this syllabus, right? So some of the questions, some of the quiz questions in the backs of the different units aren't really applicable. Like for the government rectangular survey method of a legal description, we don't have to go into too much depth, or you don't have to do the math related to that. So if you ever have a question about what's covered there, let me know. There's a key point review at the end of the chapter. Oh, sorry. Where'd that go? Why is that not showing up? One second. Oh. Try this again. It just went away. I think this will get it back. Now it's not me just yapping. You can see what I'm sharing with you. There we go, I think. There we go. Yeah. So I won't always give you assignments. Most of the assignments are just keeping up with the chapters, but occasionally I will. I'll give you some practice math problems or things like that. And then study as much as you can. Don't get in a hole. Study a minimum of a couple hours a day. The point of this chapter, very basic, very level 1, just an introduction to the words, the basic vocabulary, the classes of property. What are some physical characteristics of land? What are some economic characteristics of land? And then we'll talk a little bit about the use of land and investment as well. Most people who aren't in the business, as I get out of the way of my own slide, interchange these three words, land versus real estate versus real property. They just use any of them interchangeably, but they do have different definitions that we'll look at in just a moment. But all of that is compared to personal property, right? So imagine a piece of land, just raw land. That's land. If it's got improvements on it it's called real estate. Maybe it has a barn, then it would be considered real estate, not just land. And then if it also is going to have legal rights attached to it, the right to put a fence up and keep people out, the right to sell it, or the right to lease it to someone else. That's what makes it real property. So real property is the land plus the structures or improvements plus the bundle of legal rights that you get, what you get to do with it. And we'll see that more specifically in the coming slides in just a second. And then all of that is compared to the tractor that's sitting on that land, or the truck, or the bucket of water. That's personal property, right? If you can pick it up and take it away without it being screwed in or attached somehow to the land, then it's considered personalty or personal property. We'll get more into that. Here's another one that we see. Any given piece of property includes 3 categories of rights. So you have the surface rights, the right to put something up, like a cabin or a barn or a house. You have what's under the surface of the ground, the oil flowing, like in Texas, they have oil rigs, right? Oil derricks. You've got maybe minerals. Maybe you could mine for granite or some kind of mineral. And then also gas rights. Natural gas could be running in a vein under there somewhere, and you could sell or lease the rights of some company to come in and dig for those things. Well, maybe it's 100 acres that you own, and you live on the back part in a cabin, and then the other part off to the side, you let some company come in and drill or dig for mineral oil or gas. And so you've sold or leased the subsurface rights to them. You're using the surface rights on your own. And then you also have air rights. The property up above the property is yours too. If you've ever seen an airplane fly overhead, yeah, there are limits. You can't exactly put up a fence or keep them from flying overhead, but officially, theoretically, you own the air rights above your piece of land, as well as the surface rights and the subsurface rights. So theoretically, you own all the way up to infinity and all the way down to the center of the core of the earth, and everything attached by nature is what you own in this land thing that we're talking about. So what is land? It's the air rights, the surface rights, the subsurface rights of earth and up to infinity. Now we get into the next term, real estate. Real estate. Now that's the air rights, the surface rights, the subsurface rights, and what are you doing with it? You've installed something. A man-made, a person-made improvement, a cabin, a house, a garage, a driveway, a fence. You've put in something that's attached to that land. And so now that we have this improvement on it, what we call it is not just land anymore. It's called real estate. And then we've got real property, and then I'll come back around to that term. Real property is the air rights, surface rights, subsurface rights, the things you've built, the improvements, but then also the bundle of legal rights, the right to do with it what you want to. So let's look at some other terminology. Tenement is not this. Tenement doesn't mean something's about to fall over. When I think of the word tenement, I think of like a lower income, like borderline condemnable property, because that's like in movies and TV. But a tenement is just some sort of a structure. It's structures attached to the land. They could be in great condition. It could be a multi-million-dollar property. A tenement is a house, a barn, a structure attached to the land. So that vocabulary word, tenement, is what we're talking about. And so this little cabin here would be a tenement on this land. Hereditament. Here's another fun word that you'll never use again in your entire life after this course. But the word hereditament, what does it have as a sort of a stem or a root word in there? Hereditary. What can you leave to your heirs? They can inherit stuff from you, right? So hereditaments are property that can be inherited. You're leaving your property to someone. So that's a hereditament. It means that it is inheritable. Can you own a cabin on 10 acres? And can you leave it to your kids, your spouse, your kids? It's inheritable. It's a hereditament. So any interest in real estate that are capable of being inherited by somebody that you choose to leave them to. So here's another version of all that. Real property is the land itself. See if I can fix this a little bit. Oops. The land itself, the things attached to it. There we go. And the things that run with it or go with it. Another big word, appurtenant. The things appurtenant to the land. Okay, good. You can see my cursor. So that's all real property. The legal rights, the structures and improvements, and the land itself, the dirt itself. Then the things that are portable, that are movable, that's personal property. Cars, tractors, objects. If you're in a room right now, sitting in a chair, is that chair real property or personal property?
Personal.
Yeah, you could wheel it out the door, right? You go into your kitchen and that refrigerator, is that real property or personal property?
Personal.
So you're right. It is personal. It's really heavy. It would probably take maybe more than just one person to wheel it away from the wall and push it out the door, carry it down the steps, carry it out. But it is legally, officially personal unless it's one of those refrigerators that's like a sub-zero refrigerator and you screw it into the cabinet surrounding it. Now it's screwed in. Now it's a fixture. So it's not personal property anymore. So it does depend on its status as a fixture that we're going to get into in a little bit too. So what is an example of personal property? What are some other types of personal property that you could just pick up and walk out? Maybe something you can see while you're sitting there in that room you're in.
Furniture.
Yeah, furniture. What's on the walls?
TV.
Okay, that's a good example. In North Carolina, if that TV is mounted to the wall with a flat screen TV mount, the TV itself is still considered a piece of personal property. It's not considered a fixture, even if it's screwed onto that mount. But the mount itself is considered a fixture. And that's only because it is specifically mentioned in the contract, the standard contract 2T that I'll be showing you later. It's specifically mentioned as that way. But the typical rule of thumb about fixtures and personal versus real property is if you can't just pick it up, the weight, I guess, factors in. But if it's screwed in, nailed down, and it requires tools to remove it, it's a fixture, which means it's real property. It's attached to the real property. But if it's the furniture, like you said, if it's great question, Lena, we'll get into that. If it's a clock hanging on the wall, it's personal property. But if it's a clock screwed into the wall and you'd need a screwdriver to remove it, now it's considered part of the real property or an AKA a fixture. A mobile home. We'll get into that, I think, actually in this chapter. But the trick to making a mobile home convert from personal property to real property is 3 steps. You've got to remove the things that make it portable. What are those things? The wheels, the axle, and the trailer hitch. The things that are required for it to be pulled onto the lot. So take those things off. Why are we doing this? Why would we want to make a mobile home be legally considered real property? So a lender will give you money to buy it. The lender doesn't want to give you a mortgage on a piece of on a structure that could be driven across the country and out of the area, right? And they don't like to loan mortgage money on personal property. So taking all those things off, attaching it to a permanent foundation, probably like a brick foundation, and then we're not done. The third thing you have to do, because it got wheeled in there with its own axle and wheels, then the Department of Motor Vehicles cared about it. The Department of Motor Vehicles wanted to make sure it was roadworthy so it could get there safely and not fall apart on the road and kill people. So you got to report back into the DMV and file an affidavit with the DMV and say, hey, we've made this not personal property anymore. It's no longer portable. We've taken off the wheels and hitch and axle. We've attached it to a permanent foundation. We're just letting you know it's going to stay put. It is now personal property. So it's all 3 of those things that make this mobile home go from personal property to real property. Great question. Great segue. Then we'll get into what about a modular home? Modular versus a mobile home. A modular home means you've brought the pieces of the house, and I'll talk about it in a minute when we have actual slides and pictures to show. But you've brought this house in big chunks, like maybe 2 or 3 big already pre-assembled pieces. And it never had its own wheel or axle. It rode on the back of a semi-truck. The minute you put it together and installed it on the foundation, that's when it became real property. The DMV doesn't care about a modular home because it never was a vehicle, a definition of a vehicle like a mobile home was. So permanent improvement. What about a permanent improvement? If we know what personal property is, what's permanent stuff? Permanent improvement. What is attached and hard to, you can't just carry it out of there. What was that?
Super, maybe, or like water lines.
Yeah, that's good. The utilities, the water lines, the electric stuff. How about a fence? Probably buried in the ground in some way, maybe even concrete posts are concreted in, sidewalks and driveways and street lights. Anything that's planted or attached to the ground is a permanent improvement. Some characteristics of real property. Physical ones include the fact it is immobile. We made that mobile home immobile so that the lender would now loan you money to buy it, right? It had to be a part of real property, couldn't be personal property anymore. So immobility is one of the things that makes mortgage rates be nice and usually relatively low, because the bank feels confident their collateral for that loan, that mortgage, is not going to disappear in the middle of the night like a car could. The car could get stolen and end up somewhere else, not here. So the rate you have to pay on a car loan is higher than a mortgage rate usually, because there's more risk there in the collateral disappearing. But it's hard for real estate to disappear, right? That's what makes it immobile. It's also indestructible. And while, yes, your house could blow away or fall down, we're talking about the land, right? The land is essentially indestructible. You could dig holes in it, right? You could mine for gravel. There's a gravel pit near my house across the street. But they are mining that gravel and they're selling it off. But destroying the land is not a thing. Can't destroy the land. It's still there. There's still land there. And then it's unique. That's another one. No two parcels are exactly the same. That's the whole judicial legal basis behind suing somebody when they refuse to sell property they promised to sell. Suing a seller to specifically perform the contract. In other words, you have to sell it to me because you told me you would. And since you're backing out trying to, I'm going to sue you for specifically performing on this contract because of the uniqueness. I'm harmed as the buyer because you won't sell it to me like you promised. And so I can't just go out and find a equal replacement. Now, we all know that you can go through some neighborhoods and they all pretty much look alike. If you spun around 5 times and looked up, you wouldn't be sure, wait, is this that same house I was just looking at, or was it over there? Because they're very similarly built, maybe very similar appearance from the front, maybe the similar small lot sizes. So we're the cookie cutter kind of neighborhood, but there's still that house on that dirt as opposed to the one next door or across the street. It's still unique. Some economic characteristics include the fact that there's scarcity. That's why the values are up now, because there's only so much real estate for sale that's available right now. There's still limited supply. The scarcity is high. The location, we hear the phrase, the 3 most important words in real estate. The joke is location, 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 because location is so important. I once had a client, like in my 3rd, 4th year in the business, and she lived in what I would call sort of a production home kind of neighborhood. At the time, about $150,000 to $200,000 price range. She, on the side, her husband was actually a meteorologist for Channel 9 local news, but he was like the noontime meteorologist. And so on the side, for extra money, she cleaned houses in a Charlotte neighborhood called Myers Park. And Myers Park is old. It's an older section of town. It's surrounded by the whole city, so it can't expand. It's only as big. It only has a certain number of houses, and they've really appreciated quite a lot because they're close to all the cool things and they're nice houses, but they can't get any bigger. It's not like it's in the suburbs where there's acres and acres of expandability for future phases, right? She couldn't understand why when I was trying to help her sell her house, it was at 150 instead of 550, like the one that she cleaned in Myers Park. And I explained this concept to her. Yes, your house might be bigger than the one you're cleaning, but it's in an area that has lower value because there's a whole lot of options like your house compared to Myers Park, where it's a very limited amount of area. So the location is huge. The same size house in a neighborhood like that compared to on the waterfrontage, right? Because it's located on Lake Norman or on Baden Lake or on the ocean front. Big difference. And then what you've put on the property, what kind of improvements, the fact that you have a 4,000 square foot house with a basement and a detached 3-car garage and a pool house, all those improvements have affect the value as well. And then permanence, the fact that the property and real estate is there for the long term. It's built to stay, built to last. It's there. It's not like it's something that can just fall away and go away. So all of these characteristics are what affect the value of real estate. In terms of land use and investment, here's what the investor's thinking. It's also, by the way, what the appraiser's thinking. Then we'll take our break. What is the highest and best use of this land? Is it being used to its highest and best use? My personal example, real world, sitting in a house right now in Concord, and it's an old 1972 brick tri-level house. The deck needs to be replaced. The paint is peeling in some areas. I'd love to have like a carport or a garage. It's the house I grew up in. I bought it in 2001. It's zoned industrial. When I sell it, nobody's going to live here. They can't, because my rights to live in it residentially are grandfathered in. I was here before the zoning changed to residential or to industrial. I can't sell it for a residential purpose. I've had offers from people who wanted to make a townhouse community on these. This is 5 acres, but I can't because they can't do that because this has to be for an industrial purpose. That's the zoning attached to this land. And so I'm currently not using this property to its highest and best use. I would get more money if I sell it, and when I sell it commercially or industrially, than I would to just sell it to somebody that just wanted to live here like I'm doing right now. So I'm both not allowed to sell it to somebody who wants to do that with it, and also would be taking a serious financial hit to sell it to somebody who wanted to only do that with it, right? So the highest and best use, how will I make the most money? It might be that you don't care what the highest and best use is. You still want to do with it what you will. You could make more money selling it to a developer and having them put a bunch of houses on it, but you want it to remain farmland or pretty wooded nature kind of trails and stuff. And that's okay. But this concept of highest and best use just means, is it being used to its financial highest and best use? We'll get into some more of this, keep working our way through this unit when I see you back here in 10 minutes. We have one more little section to go. We'll be done about 9:20. So hang in there, guys. I know it's tough when it's getting a little bit later at night. Okay. Land use as an investment. Well, first of all, you own property. Can you do just anything you want to with that property? There are limits, right? Even though officially it is yours and pride of ownership and you get to do kind of theoretically what you want, it depends on where it is. There are land use controls attached to the property. There's things you can do and not do. And there's two versions of land use controls. We're going to get into them separately. One of them has to do with what the state, city, the government can enforce, and those are mainly zoning laws. Zoning laws include things like there's historical zoning sections. Because you live in the historic district downtown, you can't just replace your front door with the thing you bought from Lowe's. Because it's in the historic district, part of that deal is you must replace it with a period specific, true to its era kind of. So replacing it is different than just replacing it functionally. You're replacing it stylistically. It's probably going to be a much more expensive door than you would find from Home Depot, right? So that's because of public land use controls, because of zoning restrictions. And then my property here, I'm going to have to sell it to somebody who wants to use it industrially. You could also have public land use controls in the form of the government coming and saying, hey, it's in the public's best interest if we take half of your front yard through eminent domain. Anybody heard of eminent domain? Because they're widening a street. The whole mile of that street, everybody's going to lose part of their front yard, not because they're seizing it. They're going to pay you market value. Your definition of market value might be different than theirs, although it'll be appraised and they'll come up with a number, but you don't have many choices about it. You can't have to do it, but that's all part of public land use controls. Then there's private ones. Let's say you inherited 100 acres and you want to sell it to cash in, but it is still something that's been in your family a long time, and you want to make sure that the developer that you sell it to doesn't just carve it up and make it some ugly neighborhood that sort of would just be something you sort of break your heart. You want it to be maybe higher price range houses. Maybe you want it to be even not necessarily higher prices, but everybody gets at least an acre. And so you could place private land use controls or restrictions on this property as long as you're willing to have some buyers say, well, I don't want to buy it. It would take a special buyer that says, I will buy it with these private restrictions in place so that when I do develop it, I won't carve it up into smaller lots than an acre a piece, or maybe 5 acres a piece, or 10. So you could set that up. You could also say the private land use restrictions are you can never sell alcohol on this property. In other words, hey, developer, if you want to build a restaurant or a strip mall, that's fine, but none of the businesses can sell alcohol because I lost a family member to a DUI thing and I'm just really advocating for that sort of thing. Or it could be 100 acres, at least half of it has to remain undeveloped. I'll sell it to you, but you've got to leave a substantial portion as natural area. And these are private restrictions that you as a seller / owner that's selling to a developer could decide to place upon the property when you sell it. And then it's enforceable. What about the word when it comes to investment? What's not in this glass right now? It's a glass full of ice, but what's not in that glass is some kind of liquid until that ice melts, I guess. But the word liquidity, when it comes to real estate, not very liquid of an investment. In other words, if you take your checking account and you put it next to your mortgage, which one can you get $100 out of faster? That checking account is very liquid. Your mortgage, you're going to have to find a buyer, put it on the market, find a buyer, sell the property, close on it to get your money so that you can pull it out of that investment. Now, yes, you could get a home equity line of credit. You could borrow against the house. But in general terms, real estate has a lot of benefits as an investment, but liquidity is not one of them. It takes longer to get your money out, but that's also part of what makes it great. So there's upsides to it as well. So what can you do in this real estate business? Well, general brokerage, kind of what we've been talking about, but there's also appraisal. To be an appraiser, you don't need a real estate license. You would take, I think it's about 5 or 6 courses from a community college usually. And then here's the deal breaker for me. You have to be an apprentice to the appraiser. Find an appraiser willing to let you be their apprentice for a year. And basically you learn how to do it on the job training from them. They get the bulk of the money. So you're sort of basically paying them to train you on how to actually do it. And you got to do it that way for a whole year before you can be set loose to do it on your own. Once you do it on your own, now you could go out on your own with your own company and make pretty good money. And right now there's a bit of a shortage, and appraisers are kind of getting to pick what they want. And it'd be a good business to be in, but it's got its own rules and requirements. Financing real estate, property development, property management, handling rentals for people, counseling professionals, education is what we're doing right now. And then the professional organizations. That's something that will probably affect you, because once you get your license, you'll most likely, if you get into the business, pay to belong to the Realtor Association. So there's a professional organization. You could also, if you recall in my bio here, I've got some letters there to my, is it there? And there they are right there. So those different alphabet letters are designations I've bought, right? I've paid, had to have some experience in some cases. Some of it was just I paid money to take some courses, and because I took enough courses, I got the senior real estate specialist designation there at the top, or the certified luxury home specialist, or the pricing strategy advisor. So those are other professional organizations that you could be involved with. And there's this one when we're talking about the realtor designation. The realtor designation. Think of it this way. All realtors that can use this blue R right there, all of us are licensees. We all have to have a real estate license in order to belong to the Realtor Association, but not all licensees choose to be realtors. Most do, because the way it's kind of geared right now is that you have to be a realtor to belong to the MLS, at least to the local board. So that's part of involving the lawsuit, and that might actually go away with regard to the lawsuit getting settled, is that maybe less people will join the Realtor Association because they won't be forced to anymore to belong to the MLS, but that's its own thing. Just know that, say it correctly. Don't add the A between the L and the T. It's not realtor. So be a realtor means you pay money to belong to the trade association. It includes the National Association of Realtors, the state one, in our case, North Carolina, and then the local board. That local board is the one that has the agreement with the MLS, Multiple Listing Service. Now, to be a realtor, what does this mean? It exists to give us an extra layer of professionalism, and to require that we follow a code of ethics. So we're learning laws and rules required by the Real Estate Commission in this course, but to belong to the Realtor Association means we're also going to adhere to a more strict code of ethics that involves some extra guidelines on how to interact with each other, broker to broker, like the whole tortious interference with contractual relations thing. No stealing clients. If you do, and you get proved to have done that, you could be fined. The Realtor Association is what we would use the local board to handle a dispute of commission between two different brokers. Maybe one broker says, hey, I worked with that client. And the other one says, well, I worked with them too, and I closed on it. Well, I was the procuring cause. I started it, so I should get the commission. If two agents have a dispute, this is where they would go to settle it, have an arbitration, is through their local realtor board. That code of ethics says, hey, don't try to steal other people, poach other people's clients, among other things. It also says what you say on your personal social media could affect your realtor membership, which could then affect your real estate license, because If you are deemed to have said something considered hate speech, even on your personal social media, that's a violation of Article 16 in the Code of Ethics as of a couple of years ago. So we have to be very careful not to come across as conveying whatever hate speech is as a definition. That's the tricky part, is what is the definition? They don't really give a clear definition, but that's all part of it. It's all part of the Code of Ethics. You'll take an orientation class when you first join that will go into much more detail there. We're not talking too much about the Realtor Code of Ethics in this course, except for pretty much that. In general, how many highest and best uses of a property are there at any given time? A property's highest and best use. How many of them at one time? The very
One.
highest. Yeah, there you go. It's in the word. Highest, right? There's not like multiples, and it changes over time. 20 years ago, the highest and best use of this property I'm in now was residential. But in the last few years, it became industrial. And so we have this combination of a variety of things. If we have high demand going up, supply stays the same, then inevitably prices, basic economics, prices are trending up as well. If the demand goes down and the supply stays the same, the price is going to trend downward. If the demand stays the same and the supply goes up, prices come down. And if the demand stays the same and the supply goes down, prices will tend to go up. So if everybody wants it, prices go up. If there's not enough of it, prices go up. So it's just basic real estate supply and demand. And we're seeing a very lopsided version right now because we're still in what would be considered a seller's market. Another thing that comes into play that we'll talk about, not in this course, but when you're out in the wild doing the business, talking to consumers, is something called an absorption rate. In other words, how much inventory is out there? If no other houses got listed as of today, how long would it take for the current amount of supply to run out? And so a balanced market means there's about a 6-month supply of inventory. It takes 6 months of the current listings to sell. We are still around the 1.3 month mark. It'd only take a month or so for the current number of listings to sell out if no other listings were added to the market right now. And so we're still heavily slanted on the seller market side of things. Eventually, who knows how quickly, probably won't be for a while, but someday it'll probably become a buyer's market, the complete opposite of what we're in. So as a seller's market right now, what do we see? What do we have? We've got some builders who are paying less in commission. We've got some sellers who are paying less in commission. They are inundated with multiple buyer options because the buyers are seeking out listings and there's not many of them. But when it flips and it becomes a buyer's market, that's when we're going to see commissions going higher, builders paying us 4% with $1,000 bonus. I've been in those days before too. I made bonuses because I brought my buyer to that new construction and got it under contract, and they wanted, because there was so much competition and so many listings out there, that they were just doing all they could to get ahead of that competition. So that comes into play depending on that economic situation. Things that affect supply, labor force, the construction costs. We ran into pretty expensive lumber costs a couple of years ago. Government controls, financial policies. This is all just very high-end, 30,000-foot view, basic level that we're talking, so we're not spending much time on this. And then things that affect demand include population, the demographics of income, for instance, employment. If a new big company gets built, big business, like the Corning Center, so a lot of jobs coming in, or an Amazon warehouse or something, as well as wage levels, all those things affect demand. Here's what is incorporated in real estate. We've got residential, obviously, commercial, but also agricultural. You might be a land specialist, also industrial. Maybe you specialize in some sort of industrial requirement or need. And then we've got special purpose, you can see there, which could be government buildings, schools, things like that don't sell very often. In the commercial sector, you might run into those things. There's a certain way to determine the value of these special purpose buildings that we don't use when we do residential houses. We figure out the probable sale price of a residence differently than we would figure out the probable sale price of an old school or an old government building. But all that stuff is part of the real estate market. And no matter what your specialty or what you're doing in the business, it's just one kind of license. It's just a broker's license we're talking about. It's what you're working on right now. Some states call it a salesperson's license, and you get that first. But we call it a provisional broker's license, same basic level, that then has to turn into, in our case, a full broker's license. In their case, a broker. It goes from salesperson, then you take more education to get a broker's license. We used to do it that way. That's what I started as. And then in 2000, I took the broker courses and got that. But now, in the meantime, we've adopted this, hey, everybody's a broker. It's just what phase of broker are you? Are you the beginning level, provisional broker that you cannot be a provisional broker who's actively selling for longer than 18 months, right? Got to get those 3 posts done. So are you doing real estate for other people for a fee? You've got to have that active license to do so. Even we're getting a referral fee. Don't let the test question trick you there. A referral fee is pretty passive. And by the way, a great side benefit of having a license, it's worth it just to get the license so you can make referral fees and never even show a house, because you can just be the person that hooks people up with other agents. I might have told you the story of the old man that was in one of my CE classes, and that's all he ever did. He just got the license and immediately ran ads to get incoming leads and referred those leads out to other agents in his office. And he just made referral fees, probably 25% commission split. He took 25% of the commission and never had to show any houses, never had to deal with the stress of a house that he had listed not selling and the seller getting frustrated. So there's a lot of flexibility in this business, and that's one of the attractive parts of it, is you can do it the way you want to, as long as your firm and your broker is okay with that. Let's move on into 2. 1 goes by fast. 2 gets a little bit complicated. There's some fancy words that pop up that might be a little scary, but hang in there. Let me get this. There we go. And if you've read ahead, you know what I'm talking about. Some of these words we're going to get to the bottom of and hopefully make them seem a little more clear. So the level 1 is that bundle of legal rights, the legal rights you have when you own property. It's also something called fruits of the soil. We'll get into what that means. And estates and real property, that's one of the topics full of some scary words. What are trusts? Some level 2 are water rights and the rights to be supportive laterally versus subsurface, and then improvements and manufactured versus modular housing, which we've already kind of touched on. And then also the level 3 is how to figure out if something is a fixture or not. That'll involve an acronym called IRMA. But first, let's recap the fact that real estate is unique, and that has given rise to how the laws and rights are developed. And we as brokers need to understand how those laws are carried out and how they define real property. So, the bundle of legal rights that becomes part of real property. You've got land, plus improvements on the land, plus these legal rights that are included. When you own something, you get to do with it what you want to within reason. And that includes the right of disposition, meaning you can dispose of it how you want to, give it away or sell it. The right to enjoyment, you can enjoy it how you want to, as long as you're not violating laws or rules or zoning restrictions or private land use controls, but for the most part, you can do with it what you will. The right to exclusion, you can put a fence around it and keep people out. The right to possess it, you are the one who makes the decisions. The right to control it. You want to knock down a bunch of trees? For the most part, you can do that as long as your lender is okay with it. So there's different voices that might chime in about what you're doing with it, but for the most part, that bundle of legal rights is for you to do with it what you will with this acronym of Deep C, your rights of ownership. And it's this again. We saw this already. The land plus the improvements plus the legal rights. A couple more vocabulary words, a lot of them in this chapter. So keep track of these fruits of industry. Who plants things for the sake of making money planting things? Farmers, agricultural use, right? So cultivation, planting corn because in a certain number of weeks you're going to chop that corn and sell it. So fructus industrialis means fruits of industry. You're growing this stuff for the purpose of selling it. And it's personal property. Here's the point of the slide. When it's for the purpose of selling, like fruits of industry, corn, cultivating something like a farm does, it's considered personal property. Even if you sell this land with the corn still growing on it, because it's not ready to be harvested for 3 more weeks, but you're going to go ahead and close on it tomorrow. You have the right built in to come back and harvest it because it's considered personal property, because it's fructus industrialis, fruits of industry. It requires cultivation. Therefore, by default, unless you've written in it in the contract otherwise, it's considered personal property. That makes sense? Soybeans, corn, whatever you might be planting is considered personal property. Even if you close on it tomorrow, the seller gets to come back and harvest it unless you make other arrangements. But by default, that's what it is. It's personal property. On the other hand, those pretty trees, those azaleas in the front yard, the crepe myrtles, that's fructus naturalis. Those are fruits of the soil. The grass, the shrubs, the underlying growth, that's considered real property. You didn't have to cultivate it, right? Maybe you moved there and those things were already there and you never had to lift a finger. I just 3 weeks ago went through and after several years, I cut a lot of the little small growth on, gosh, I think I've got about 15 crepe myrtles that have been growing here forever. They're about 20 feet tall and they were just messy. Some have had vines growing up through them and I spent several hours just trimming with a saw and making them nice and pretty and getting all that mess out from under them. And they would just keep growing. I didn't have to do that. It had nothing to do with them continuing to grow. They're real property. They don't need to be cultivated. You don't dig them up and replant every year to get a new crop of them. So that's the difference. Fructus naturalis is real property. Fructus industrialis is personal property. Something that runs with the land is called an appurtenance. Another big word. Appurtenance just means it runs with the land. What runs with the land? When you sell your property, you are selling the property, but also the rights to the property. So you get to maybe rent your house. If you wanted to just go live with your parents again or with family members and rent out the house you own, that's a right that runs with the land. When you sell your property, the new owner can rent it out too if they want to, right? So any sort of right or privilege that runs with the ownership of the land. Let's say that you are on a lot and between you and the main road is your neighbor. And you can't get out to the road unless your neighbor lets you drive across their land. And so your driveway goes across their property so that you can get to the road, because in North Carolina, you can't sell landlocked property. Property can't be locked up and kept from main or some sort of roadway. Therefore, you have an appurtenant easement in the form of that driveway that your neighbor has to honor. And when the neighbor sells their property, the new owner has to continue letting your driveway be across their property because it's considered an appurtenant easement. You're the one who benefits from that driveway. And so you're considered the dominant estate because you get the privilege of driving across their land on the driveway that is the appurtenant easement, as an example. Their estate is called the subservient estate because they have to let you do it because there can't be a landlocked property. So an appurtenance is any sort of right or privilege that goes along with owning that land, whether you get it now that you own it, but when you sell it, that person now has it. And when they sell it, the next person now has it. It might be the rights to own the property all the way up to the edge of the lake that it borders. Those are water rights, and those also run with the land. You don't get to come back and launch your boat off of that property when you sell it. It is now the possession and the right, the privilege of the person you sold it to. It's not yours anymore because it ran with the land. It didn't stick with you. How many owners could be on a given property? Well, since there's air rights, surface rights, and subsurface rights, theoretically, all three of these things could be owned separately, deeded separately, so that one party gets to mine for mineral oil or gas, like in Texas. Another party lives on a house on the land, and then yet another party gets to use the air rights and build something towering above everything. I believe it's Grand Central Station as an example in New York, where they owned the property, but they sold or leased the air rights to the bank that built the building, the skyscraper above it. So there's an example where they gave up their air rights to someone else for money. So typically we're transferring all three, but you could separate them out and sell a portion of them. Maybe just the you retain the surface rights and the air rights, but you sell or you lease the subsurface rights to someone else to make the money. Other types of appurtenances. We're going to get into these in order, but water rights, lateral support, subjacent, those are two kind of support rights because of the way things are positioned. Easements. An example of an easement would be that driveway easement. It could also be that the power company gets to come across the back corner of your land to get to their green power box, or to climb the light pole and service the light fixture or the power transformer, and improvements as well as covenants. So let's look at some water rights first. When it comes to water rights, more vocabulary. Is it the kind of water that has tides, like big bodies of water? Of course, oceans have tides, but did you know there are lakes that are big enough that they have tidal behavior? The tide goes in and out, comes up higher on the shoreline, and mainly the Great Lakes, like Superior and Michigan, all those lakes are so big that the moon creates tidal behavior, and they come up further on the shore at certain times of day, just like the ocean does. So anytime it's a tide-related body of water, the rights attached to it, what do you own when the tide comes in? In North Carolina, you own to what's called the high tide line. How high does it come in? That's the line that you own to. When it goes out, there's more beach showing. And you do not own to the low tide line. People are allowed to walk across the beach in front of your beach house as long as low tide is in, or is out, and they're walking that part of the beach. But when it's high tide, they can't walk across your property because that's yours, because your line stops at the high tide line. It's this. We own to that high. You can tell how far it comes in. That's yours. But when it's out, all the way down here, maybe, if you can see my little cursor. Yeah, I think you can. This piece here would not be your property. Your property is the red line back, because that's how far the water comes in. And those are called littoral rights. Littoral rights involve tidal behavior, tidal waterways, relating to or situated on the shore of a sea or lake that has tides. The other kind of rights involve non-tidal waters, and those are called riparian. So riparian is non-tides, littoral is tides. What does riparian look like? You could have a navigable body of water. A river, a lake, like in Charlotte, we've got Lake Norman, we've got Mountain Island Lake, and they're connected by the Catawba River. So all of that is navigable. Somebody could start up high, the north part of Lake Norman, and make their way down through Lake Norman, through the Catawba River, down to Mountain Island Lake, and on down to Lake Wylie, I think, which is in the southwest section. It's all navigable. It can be accessed by boat. But then you've got maybe those little lakes and ponds that are completely captured, not connected by big rivers and things, and those are non-navigable. So why does this matter? It depends on how much you own. Do you own any of the water or not? If it's a navigable body of water like Lake Norman, you do not own to the center. You only own to the edge. You own to the edge of the water. And if it's a non-navigable body of water, you own all the way out into the water to the center. Imagine a little stream between you and your neighbor. You both have the right to wade into that stream to the middle, because that's where your line is. You can fish in the stream, and your property line is not to the water's edge because it's a non-navigable body of water. Your property line is all the way to the center of the water between you and that neighbor. I have a friend who just moved into some land. It's 10 acres, and he and family members built 3 houses for the 3 different families, all within the same family, but 3 immediate families. And one side is next to a little lake, like a little pond. And the neighbor apparently told him he was welcome to use that pond. And he told me this, and I looked at it and I said, well, I'm glad he told you that, because you have the legal right to use it, because it's non-navigable and you actually own to the center of it. Apparently the neighbor made it sound like, hey, let me be nice to you and let you use it. But in fact, he gets to use it because it is his all the way to the center. So knowing what your rights are is kind of important. So what if that neighbor was mean and said, you can't use it anymore? At some point, he's going to have to say, wrong, because look at the law. Here it is. So as brokers, you have to always think in this course, how does this come back around and affect me as a broker helping people do this business, so that you can tell your buyer or your seller what they own and what they don't, and what they are required to do and maybe not allowed to do. So the riparian rights are important in that way. Riparian, again, not tied, and whether the body of water is navigable or not. If it's navigable, meaning it can be used sort of as a road, in other words, you own just to the edge, typically the larger ponds and lakes and rivers. The non-navigable ones you own all the way to the center. We saw the literal one already. And then a couple other words, accretion. The word accretion has to do with water, because if a storm comes through, and because of the way the water's moving, it disrupts the sand. And so sand gets added and accumulated. Maybe that's the way you can remember this. You're gaining land through accretion because it's accumulating. Look at the ACC of accretion. Accumulate, accretion. The sand is coming up above the water because it was moving around so much. And now you've got more land showing. You own that land. You've added the land that you own, because maybe that little island you can see in the distance, now they can walk out onto this sandbar. I wouldn't build a house on it, because with the next storm, it might get covered with water again. But legally and theoretically, they are gaining land, and that land belongs to them. Whoever owns this piece of this lot right here, right? They're gaining it how? Through accretion. Soil being deposited by the water movement. And again, I'm looking for ways to remember stuff, and I've never used this before. I just thought of it just now. So accumulation, accretion. Is that what I just said? Gaining land through soil deposited by the water. Here's the opposite of that. Gaining land because the water goes away or dries up or recedes because of drought. And that word for that is reliction. I would say recede, reliction. Think of those two words together. Reliction is the word for gaining land because water is receding. And if you drive across a lake, like we'll drive across the bridge over Lake Norman, and sometimes in the summer of a drought, you can see an extra wide band of red clay all the way around the border. That's because the water level dropped, because there was a drought that season. And so you're seeing more shoreline than normal. Well, that owner owns that extra, now recently uncovered extra shoreline that was uncovered because of reliction. Again, I'm not going to build a shed on it, because the very next year it might be covered up again. But theoretically, or legally, I should say, they own a little bit more because a little more land is showing because of this reliction phenomenon. Now we're talking about losing land. Those first two were gaining land. Here's how you lose land. This is no surprise. This is an extreme version, but we've all seen erosion. It's the slow, gradual wearing away of land by water movement. Water's rushing over this over time, and it's making that soil just fall away. And those tree roots that are showing, eventually, if it keeps eroding like that, the tree's going to fall over. And I've seen houses on sides of cliffs. I just saw one last week. I should have screen captured it, but it's a person who owns like a $16 million house, and the cliff is starting to erode to the point where the house structures, support structures are showing, and he won't move out. He's insisting on staying. But that's erosion, losing land gradually, because water is kind of wearing it away. And then another way to lose land, and the last of these four big words, sudden tearing away of land, like in a hurricane. When you can see down here, the green has been replaced by blue because the hurricane just blew such big waves through there that the land got covered, got torn away. And that word is avulsion. Avulsion. Losing land suddenly because of natural events. Earthquake, flood, hurricane, sudden tearing away of land is called avulsion. So we've got avulsion, erosion, reliction, and accretion. I'm noticing just some similarities here. Two ways of gaining land end in tion, accretion, and reliction, right? Reliction has to do with receding, the water receding. And then I'm noticing the losing of land is ending in sion, both of these, erosion and avulsion. Maybe that's helpful in kind of tuning your brain in. Let's talk about support. When your lot is a little lower than your neighbor's lot, it might be nice that they build, or somebody builds, a retaining wall. And that is giving lateral support rights. The sides of the land are being supported with some man-made structure, so as to maintain the lot dimensions. And what does this something like a retaining wall accomplish? Well, it lets that upper landowner have a flatter yard. They don't have to worry about the slope in between theirs and yours anymore. But lateral support rights are the sides of the land. Lateral, if you spend any time in a weight room and seen people lift their arms and lift the dumbbells like this, those are lateral dumbbell raises. They want to build up those deltoids on the sides, the lateral side of the deltoid, the lateral head. So that's lateral and the sides. And then if you have a situation where on the right picture here, you've sold your mineral rights, your subsurface rights, or leased them. If that company that you leased them to is taking those resources out of the ground, that leaves vacant areas under there, right? And voids. And so they need to provide support to make up for the fact that they pulled stuff out of the earth. And that is called subjacent rights, subjacent support rights, meaning you're in the subsurface area, and so you're replacing the support that was provided by the stuff you took out. So you're building something to provide support because you took mineral oil or gas out of there. Subjacent rights and lateral rights. So a pop quiz. How many deeds or titles could there be on any given single property? How many of them on a given property? 3. There you go. Yeah. For the surface rights, the subsurface rights, and the air rights. You got it. When a property is transferred to a new owner, what happens to the water rights?
They transfer to.
Yeah, you got it. They run with the land. They transfer to. The old owner doesn't have the right to come back and use and fish off the side of that shore into the water anymore. They gave up those rights when they sold it. Exactly. So in real property, you've got the characteristics of immovability and indestructibility. You've got the land plus everything on it naturally, like the shrubs and the grass, plus the improvements attached by people, like the house and the garage. And that's real property. It's the land, the improvements, and the legal rights. Here's personal property. Personal property is movable, not immovable, because you can pick that vase up and walk out the door with it. Another word, if you know, in real estate, I'm sure you've seen the word realty. That's in fact the name of my company, Impact Carolina's Realty, because it means real property. Well, personalty means personal property. So you might see those words interchanged. Personal property, personalty, something that is not real property, something that's not attached to the ground in some way, that's more movable or portable. And when we're talking about making something personal property that used to be real property, or the opposite, the word severance, sever, like you're chopping something, like this tree was real property until you got there with your chainsaw and chopped it down. Now that tree is considered personal property because you can throw it on the back of a truck and drive off with it, right? So severing the real property, changing real property to personal property through severance, picking the apple off the tree, cutting the crop of corn. You're severing in fact, corn's a bad example because we already learned that corn is a Fructus industrialis, so it's considered personal property already. But you have the right to chop it and go away with it. Annexation is when we are taking personal property and turning it into real property. So when you buy those bookshelves from IKEA, and they come in 857 different pieces and 4,000 screws, and you put it together and you screw it into the wall so it doesn't tip over and kill your family, you have annexed it and made it real property because now it's screwed into your house. You screwed it into the wall. If you had left it freestanding, it would have remained personal property. Or in this case, they've bought the marigolds from Lowe's, brought them home. If they left them in the pot on the sidewalk, it's still personal property. But the minute they planted it in the ground, they annexed those flowers. Through annexation, they've changed it from personal property to real property. This is the level 3 stuff, by the way, guys. Because in real life, out there in the wild in this business, this is what causes lawsuits. This is what causes stressful closings. There's an example of a fellow instructor, and she's pretty much retired now, but she remembers this, and you know, when you do this business, you have a bad experience and you add it to your list of things to never have to deal with again, because I'm going to talk about it earlier in the process. Well, she was the buyer's agent. And when they looked at the house, it had a bunch of these yellow flowers lining the sidewalk all the way up to the front door. And so at closing, before you go to closing, you do some sort of a walkthrough. Ideally, you want to walk through before closing, and I like to do it the day before, just in case the seller forgot to do something or didn't repair something. They can't say, well, oh, too bad, it's too late now, you'll just have to close on it anyway. I want to give them time to fix it and not try to use that as some sneaky, sleazy way of getting out of what they agreed to do. Well, she did a walkthrough on the morning before closing, meaning in 3 hours she was going to closing. And everything looked fine. The yellow flowers looked great. They went to closing. It all went fine. She went with them back to the house afterward to give them a closing gift and just to kind of celebrate. All the yellow flowers were gone. Vanished. Because after they did the walkthrough 3 hours ago, the seller came back and took them. She called the listing agent. She said, What happened? What is this? The buyer was devastated. She was really just upset because it just ruined the whole look of the front, and she was so happy, but then this was just sort of like getting her legs pulled out from under her. So my friend was trying to salvage the feeling and the happiness of the day, and she called the listing agent and said, they weren't supposed to take these flowers. Why are these flowers gone? And the agent said, oh, those flowers weren't planted in the ground. They were left in the pots and put in the ground. And we all pause and think about the sleaziest lawyer situation that we've ever seen. Some little loophole thing of some little arcane rule or something. And they got away with it because leaving it in the pot makes it continue to be personal property. And ever since then, every transaction she did ever since then, this was many years ago, she always double checked all the flowers to make sure the pots were gone, that they were actually planted in the soil and not left in the pots. Guess who bought $1,000 worth of flowers to keep her client happy, my friend? Because the client was devastated. There was really no solution. She felt probably a little guilty herself, even though, I mean, she probably wasn't. It probably wasn't something she'd have gotten in trouble for, but she went all over town, she and her husband, buying out all of Lowe's and Home Depot to make sure they put back, they couldn't get them all in the same color, but they at least replaced them. And she just did that. Sometimes we do things, and I call it happiness money. We're spending happiness money to keep people on track to close. Maybe they wouldn't have closed if all this had happened before closing. But in her case, she was even more commendable that she did it because she just wanted her client to have a happy experience. And I'll bet that client came back to her again and again when they sold it, when they bought the next one, when they told their friends to use Margie because, look, let me tell you what she did for me. And that is part of how this business works. So annexation, changing personal property to real property. Fixtures, again, this is level 3 stuff. Fixtures is this. Annexing personal into real. It could be these solar panels that came on the back of a truck. Now they're screwing them in, mounting them onto the roof. Now it's real property through being a fixture. And this guy's putting up some shutters, annexing them into being real property because there's now it's a fixture. Here's how you would prove the fixture concept if you had to go to court over it. Let's say somebody took the chandelier out of the dining room ceiling between the walkthrough and closing. And you had to sue them over it. The client sued them over it. The judge would say, we need to incorporate the total circumstances test to determine if the thing that was removed was indeed a fixture. What was the intention of it when it was put in? Was it intended to stay forever? Or was it like ever rent a place? Maybe you're renting a place now. Within the lease, you might have the right to screw in a couple little shelves or something. But those shelves you get to take back down because they're yours, because the way the lease reads, it lets you do that. Maybe. So what was the intention? As a renter, you put up those shelves to hold your diploma and your little knickknacks. You didn't intend to stay there forever. So therefore, under the total circumstances test, you'd probably get to keep your shelf. Because the judge would say, well, it was a tenant who put that in, and they intended to take it with them when they left. If it had been an owner who installed the shelves, well, they own the property. And if the tenant leaves and takes the shelves with them that the owner put in, then that would be wrong. Because the owner intended for those shelves to stay because they installed them in property that they owned themselves. See how that works? So intention looks like this. Was it intended to be a fixture? The court looks at facts and determines what would a reasonable person have intended. All 4 of these IRMA items in this acronym are required, but intention, the first one is the major one. If it passes the intention test, you're probably going to succeed in this thing being considered a fixture. The relationship means who did the attaching, who installed it. Again, if it's the owner, and then probably it was intended to be permanent. If it was a tenant, probably intended to be just while they were there during their lease. So the greater the legal relationship, the greater likelihood it will be considered a fixture. How was it attached? In a way that it would be impossible to remove it without damaging the property, then it's going to be more geared toward being considered a fixture. Was the space around it customized to account for it? Again, then it's probably a fixture. And then how was it adapted to the real estate? Was it a built-in? Has the item and the stuff around it, like the cabinets, for instance, been adjusted to work together? Then it's more likely it will be considered a fixture. And then finally, we'll end after this. This big monster fountain might weigh 500-600 pounds. It's got water in it. Is it a fixture? According to IRMA. The point of this slide is it doesn't matter how much it weighs. It doesn't matter that it costs $2,000. It doesn't matter where it's located. we can't tell if this is a fixture just by looking at it. It could just be sitting on top of the ground, in which case you and I, all 5 of us, probably could not pick it up between us and move it because it's still too heavy. We would need a forklift, but it's still not attached to footings that are sunk into the ground. Or maybe it is. So if it is, then it's real property. But if it's not, then it could still be personal property. So is it a fixture out there in real life in the wild and you're the broker? The size, the value, and the location are irrelevant of what makes it a fixture. The legal test is going to be back to Irma. What was the intention? Did the owner put it in or did the tenant put it in? What was the relationship? How was it attached? What was the adaptation? So just know that these 3 things have nothing to do with whether it's considered a fixture or not. We're going to keep making our way through all this and get into types of estates and types of concurrent ownership when you own property together with someone else. So read ahead if you haven't already. Those are some big and confusing things I'm going to clear up for you when I see you here tomorrow night. Have a great night. See you then.